Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, spirits of all ages, welcome to the BlunderSpeaker Show. Well, welcome back to the BlunderSpeaker Show, everybody. Come on in, the show where we talk about Spirit Island and everything gets done in one take. This evening I started my intro. I talked about it last time that I do a little practice run of my intro. And I was doing it a moment ago, and I went to look at my screen. I didn't have my notes up. I didn't even have my notes finished, so I'm all over the place. We're coming in hot here. The last 5 minutes have been a total blur. I'm a little bit of a mess. But yeah, look, my name is Tepidgoose. Come on in. Welcome to the show. This sort of little intro, if you're new to the show, you're going to get plenty of this, because this is indeed the show where we talk Spirit Island and everything gets done in one take. There's no practices. There's no reruns. There's no retries. None of that stuff. We don't have time for any of that, so come on in, get yourself a drink, get yourself, a cup of tea, get yourself a fancy beer, perhaps like I have beside me here, which we'll talk about in just one moment. And yeah, we're here to talk about the kingdom of Brandenburg-Prussia. These are our third adversary as part of this series. So yeah, if you're new to the show, like I said, Spirit Island's the game. If you enjoy the game, stick around. If you don't, you probably won't have a clue what's going on. But yeah, for anybody new, please do think about hitting the like, subscribe, share, turn on your notification bell, all that kind of good stuff. But for everybody else who's here from before, welcome back. It's a pleasure to have you. Really looking forward to tonight's episode. We are Wednesday, 26th of February. It is now currently local time 21:56, almost 10 p.m. And I keep doing this. I keep starting my episodes way too late in the evening because I keep having way too much to do to prepare. And as you may see from my outfit, for those of you who are watching in video format, I am of course wearing a Manchester United jersey, and United were playing this evening. So I had a little bit of a kind of a dual intent this evening while I was getting stuff ready for the show. I was also in the background watching the mighty Reds win 3-2 against the mighty Ipswich Town. And for any of you who know anything about Manchester United, you'll know how ridiculous that sentence was, because we are, of course, absolutely terrible. And enough about that, because you didn't come here to hear me talk about Manchester United. You came here to hear me talk about Brandenburg-Prussia. That's right. That's what we're here to talk about. These are, of course, as I say, the third of 8 adversaries as part of my adversary series. And yeah, I gave them, as I say, third from bottom in terms of difficulty, so about a 9.5 points of difficulty rating for me. Of course, they are rated 10 by the creators of the game, but that's neither here nor there. We're here to talk about my opinions, not the creators of the game. That's why you're here. That's why you click the button, and that's why, of course, you click the like button as you were going. So yeah, look, let's jump right in. But before I do, I did mention, of course, at the start, I have a wonderful treat, a can of beer, a very fancy, very quite famous and hard to find can of beer called Flora and Fauna. It's a double IPA. 9.45%. So we're going a little bit high up in the absolute volume here for this evening, folks. But I've been off work for a little while, and I'm about to go back. So this will be my last time recording an episode before I'm back in work next week after a little bit of a period off. So I decided I'm going to spend a little bit extra to enjoy my last go around before life gets a little bit real and a little bit serious again when I go back to my full-time job. But for now, here it is, and allow me one moment to truly appreciate. Oh, that's a good beer. Award-winning beer, very difficult to find, as I mentioned. It's been a couple of years since I've had that beer, so very, very happy with that. I suppose I'll take the time to pour myself a glass of dreaded sparkling water. You're all well familiar with the routine at this stage. I'll have to keep myself hydrated as I go, especially drinking beer of that high percent, but that's neither here nor there. as I say, if you're new to the show, you'd probably be thinking, why the hell is that last 4 minutes and 53 seconds been kept in that video? Why on earth doesn't he throw all that out and start again? Well, as I say, we don't have time for any of that stuff, so we're going with it, and we are going to go straight in, and we're going to look at the adversary panel of Brandenburg-Prussia. So let's start, as we always do, up in the top left-hand corner of the card here, and we will see, of course, that there is no additional loss condition. BP are the second of 8, so there's only 2 total adversaries that don't have a loss condition. This is one of the 2. We've already had the other, of course. Who were Sweden, who were ranked bottom of our difficulty rating. So maybe not surprising to see that sort of, the 2 without a loss condition ended up very near the bottom of the list. That's, I guess, like I said, not really a coincidence or a surprise for me. But I did say it last time, and I'll certainly say it again here. BP are no joke. They're one of the easier adversaries, but that doesn't certainly make them easy. And we will spend quite a bit of time this evening finding out why that is the case. So moving across then, the stage 2 escalation is very straightforward, basically the easiest, or at least the simplest, or the least complex of all of the escalations. It basically just says land rush before exploring on each board with buildings, which will be most boards most of the time. You will add a town to a land without a town. And that's without a town, not a building. So you can, sort of clump up your buildings a little bit by sort of adding your town into a city land, which I think came up in the playthrough that I was doing at least once. So that's quite nice. You don't sort of have to spread fully across the island tile with this ability. So it's a little bit like I think we saw with maybe something like France 6 before. So we talked the last time out about during the previous adversary review, that with the France 6 rule, where you're sort of placing an explorer every time you do the explorer, getting to sort of take advantage of that in some way or another is obviously very beneficial, right? So you're gonna want to be very careful where you place this that explorer and now this town, right? So there are certain spirits who can make this much easier. There are certain sort of board configurations and sort of contexts that this can be sort of obviously a lot easier or a lot harder. Just one example that we talked about as part of the previous playthrough is Volcano. We'll talk about Volcano later in the show because that was my playthrough for BP, but they're an example of a spirit that sort of almost gets to ignore this rule for the most part. Because they've got their volcano land that they keep clean and clear, and they'll almost always have that spot where they can just dump the town into and kind of ignore it. But for other spirits, obviously this becomes a lot more complicated if they can't get rid of plastic off the board and so on. So it's one of them. I think it's quite context dependent, but at least it's simple. Now, after that, then we've obviously got 6 levels, as they all do. We said that already. For each of our adversaries, fear cards look like 3/3/3 at level 1, which they all have, but you're only going as far as 4/4/4. Which is interesting, and it's worth pointing out here that this is, I think I mentioned it last time, this is the lowest of all of the 8 adversaries. It stands on its own at 4/4/4 as the lowest. I think there's there's maybe 2 that go 4/4/5, I think. So yeah, it's right. Actually, I think there's 3 of them, but it's at the bottom on its own, and that makes it the easiest adversary to obviously run through all 12 cards and get to a fair victory. So that's something very much to bear in mind as we go throughout the show this evening. So after that, then they have from levels 1 through 6. We're gonna have level 1 is called Fast Start. Okay, during setup on each board, add a town to land number 3. Very straightforward, no variability. There's no the highest number or the lowest number or any other that kind of stuff. It's just get a town and land number 3. Stop. Okay, again, simple, right? We talked about the escalation. It's very simple. It puts a town every escalation symbol you see, and here we are at the beginning of the game. You just add 1 extra town to the board, and that's it. Okay, not too bad, not too difficult, not too complex. We're happy to see that. We just kind of do it once at the start of the game, and that's it, which is quite nice. And that's going to be a theme, as we see. It's already starting to emerge about the sort of simplicity of the rules. Well, it's kind of it only gets simpler from here. That's you've basically seen all of the complexity of the adversary already by level 1. After that, the only thing that we're doing is changing the order of the invader deck. So that's your level 1. Now, level 2, they call this Surge of Colonists. And this is when making the invader deck, you put one of the stage 3 cards between stage 1 and stage 2. So, under normal circumstances, and we'll do this kind of under normal circumstances thing almost sort of throughout each of these steps, because you can see how it changes from the normal circumstance. So usually you will have, we are all probably quite familiar with this at this stage, it'll be 3 stage 1 cards, 4 stage 2 cards, and then 5 stage 3 cards. That's your general setup. Now what you're doing is you're taking one of those stage 3 cards and you move it up between the stage 1 and the stage 2. So now we're going to hit 1, 1, 1, 3, 2, 2, 2, 2, and then 3, 3, 3, 3. So you move that stage 3 basically all the way from out of the 3 block at the end, and you move it up between the block of the 1 and the block of the 2. Okay, yeah, that's pretty tough. You hit a stage 3 card pretty early. Okay, what's the next thing they're doing? Stage 3 is called Efficient. When making the invader deck, remove an additional stage 1 card. Okay, so now the new deck order goes 1, 1, and then the 3 we just talked about, then your 2s, and then your 3s. So we now lose a stage 1 card, and that's, as we see with multiple other adversaries, pretty tough actually. That's a pretty big jump. Losing that stage 1 and jumping right into that stage 3 after 2 stage 1s, that's fairly tough there. I don't actually have the difficulty as they go up here, so it jumps a couple times. So their difficulty increases by a single point a few times, and then it jumps by 2 points on sort of 2 of these spots here. I think that might be one of them. So then the next thing is, so that was Efficient. Now we go to stage level 4, and it's called Aggressive Timetable. When making the invader deck, remove an additional stage 2 card. So before we removed an additional stage 1 card, now we're going to go ahead and we're going to remove an additional stage 2 card. So we keep our 1, 1, then our 3, then we go into our block of 2s here, but instead of 4 stage 2 cards, we're only going to have 3 of them. So it goes 2, 2, 2, and then into our stage 3s at the end. So when does this matter basically in the game? The point at which this makes a difference to your game is after you've already gone through a 1, a 1, a 3, a 2, a 2, a 2. So you've kind of gone through 6 invader cards before this actually changes the game at all, because it will be the 4th 2 and that will be the 7th card. So, you know, you can see here why this is obviously a lot less difficult than the previous level in terms of a jump. The previous level took out a stage 1, so that starts to make a difference in your game after 2 cards, whereas now it's only starting to make a difference in your game after 6 cards. So you can see there's a kind of a, you know, quite a big difference, and that's why I talked about before the jump of 2 points versus the jump of 1 point. So that's okay. Next thing, so that was Aggressive Timetable. Now we go to to level 5. It's called Ruthlessly Efficient. So before we had Efficient, now we've got Ruthlessly Efficient. And now it says when making the invader deck, remove an additional stage 1 card. Okay, so now we go 1, 3, 2, 2, 2, and then all your 3s at the end. So yeah, we're back to the front of the invader pile. Basically, we removed a 1, then we jumped and we removed a 2 at the end. Now we're back and we're removing a 1 again. So again, here this is going to start mattering on the second turn, basically the second explore, because it's a 1. Actually, it's gonna matter on the first turn, in fact, because you start with a stage 1 explore, which will be your opening explore, and then on the first turn of the game you're going to build, and then you're immediately hitting your stage 3. So that's coming up really, really quickly, super tough, and I think that may well be another jump of 2 again, if I'm not mistaken. To get to there. And then finally then, after Ruthlessly Efficient, we've got level 6, which is called Terrifyingly Efficient. And this is the last of the levels, and it's the last of these iterations that they do on the deck. And it says, when making the invader deck, remove all stage 1 cards. Remove all of them. So you go straight away, first turn of the game, very first opening explore is a stage 3 card, followed by 2, 2, 2, which is 3 stage 2 cards, and then 3, 3, 3, 3. You're now down to an 8 an 8-card invader deck. Whereas before you start off with it's so 1, 2, 3, 4. I think you remove 4. I think so. It's usually 12, and now you get down to 4. So I should have checked that before I started here, but just reading it now. So from levels 3 through 6 is where you remove the cards. Level 2, you just move one of them. You don't remove any, but all the other 4 levels you remove a card. So that's basically 12 down to 8. That's removing 4 full turns from the game. So not only does it put stuff up front, and it makes it harder and more challenging because you hit those stage 3 cards early, and the stage 2s obviously earlier as well, but you also have far less turns in the game, which is the other sort of implication on this. So simple in terms of complexity, yes, but in terms of difficulty in the game and how hard that is to play against, by no means simple. It should be said. So that's basically it. There's not much to say in terms of the card. Obviously, the implications and how it plays out and all the rest of it here is there's plenty to be said around that, and we will sort of go through. I'm going to start as I have before, and I will sort of get straight in, and we'll talk about the community comments and the conversation and the inputs, because there were many. And there were fantastic inputs as per usual from last time out. So I'll stop here. I'll take a bit of time to enjoy my glorious beer and my equally glorious water, and we'll start. I posted this the other day. My "How do you feel about" series continues on, and it's as verdant as ever and doing fantastic. So a big thank you, of course, to everybody who provided inputs on this. And I posted this a handful of days ago, and I made the post said, "How do you feel about Brandenburg-Prussia? Hit the button." Literally, what felt like 20 seconds later, I get an input. Somebody's responded already at Taste the Rainbow, and this is absolutely brilliant. "At least the games are fast." 6 words. That's the whole post. So I really like that. It was a really good way to start it off. Very, very thematic, of course. Straight in, right off the bat, first person to respond, and they say, "At least the games are fast." So I'm not fully sure whether that means they just hate playing against Brandenburg-Prussia, or whether they just, don't particularly enjoy Spirit Island at all. But at least the games are fast is what they say. So continuing on, and we had a really, really good input here from Nora Adrenaline, so frequent commenter here, came in with, they feel fair in the sense that all of the tactical moves that are supposed to work. Little maneuvers like clearing a land before it builds, defend a land with the hand, the things we tell new players they need to do in order to win the game. It's more or less just base game on steroids. So they may be the easiest adversary in the game, because for me, a lot of the game's difficulty comes from a bad call I made because I briefly forgot how the adversary I was playing against worked, and that'll never happen versus good old Prussia. So I certainly know the feeling. You forget a rule, it's just sitting blindly right in front of you. You make a mistake, and you get your difficulty from that, which I've talked about in the past myself plenty. But look, is it flashy? No. But so far we've roasted Sweden and France for having sort of arbitrary kitchen sink rules at higher difficulties, which don't necessarily fit with their core team. And of course, they're talking about the previous episodes on my show. And then they say BP has its thing. It does its thing as much or as little as you want it to, and that's absolutely all it's gonna do. And you gotta respect that. And I gotta respect this comment because bread and butter, there you go, that's it. They say it in a nutshell, and I completely and utterly agree with everything they've said here. They say that it's the easiest adversary for them, at least because they don't make all those kind of mistakes that they may be making against others, which is sort of maybe neither here nor there. You have my opinion on how easy they are. I put them third from bottom, but I certainly agree with everything else that they said. And they actually came back with a second comment, which was another really good one. Nora says, also, everyone who has learned Spirit Island from me in the past couple of years has played Brandenburg-Prussia 0 without knowing it. I just tell them that's what the little symbol on the stage 2 invader card means. So this is actually really cool and a really nice idea, and I really liked this because I myself taught the game to a friend of mine. Hoagie, if you're listening, I thought a friend of mine, good friend of mine, who was listening in to the podcast, and they're like, "Hey, this game sounds cool. I don't really know what the hell I'm listening to when you're talking, but it sounds interesting. I'd quite like to learn how to play." So I was teaching him last weekend, and we were playing base 0 difficulty, just literally no adversary, no nothing really. We played with events or whatever, but we didn't play with we played with a blight card, but with no adversary. But we didn't have an escalation. And it was like, when I turned over the stage 2 card, it was like, oh, there's the escalation symbol I was telling you about, but we actually have no effect here. And it was weird. I was like, I haven't done this since literally the very first time I opened the game years ago. I don't teach the game very much, so I haven't really done all that many teaching games. But when I saw this, I was like, hey, that's a cool idea, actually. Just tack on, if you're playing a game with no adversary, you just go, yeah, you're BP 0 now, and you basically just do the out of town ability somewhere on the island. So I think that was a really nice idea. So moving on, I have something on my glasses which I'm going to attempt to clean as I speak here. Well, actually, that's a lie, because I can't see the screen at all. So I chose a terrible time to take my glasses off, because I'm blind as a bat. So let's wait for a moment to make sure that all came out okay. It certainly did. So we've got Fancy Pants 101 says, I've actually played against them the most in tabletop, and they mean tabletop in real life, not tabletop simulator, which is the most confusing and annoying thing ever, but that's neither here nor there. Because if I'm playing in real life, they're easy to scale up with my friends who don't play often. Obviously not the most difficult adversary, but definitely a useful one, especially when teaching people. And this is a theme that comes up, I think quite a lot of people said this, is that they really like this as a teaching spirit. So Nora obviously before was talking about BP 0 being the kind of base level teaching element, even if she's not necessarily telling not necessarily telling the people they're playing with, but Fancy Pants here is obviously talking about, well, maybe if you're learning an adversary and you're going up through the levels, maybe level 1, 2, 3, whatever it may be. So, it's I think something that a lot of people agree with. Certainly something I strongly agree with here as well. Next we have Beta Gin coming back and saying, I like Prussia for what it is. And they say it's a simple way to scale difficulty without rules overhead. It's certainly not my favourite adversary as someone who likes longer games, but the game needs such a thing, and I totally agree with that as well. But they say my main gripe doesn't really have anything to do with the adversary itself, but its status as effectively the default adversary. And you see that written a lot. A lot of people say, what should I do if I'm only learning out, or if I want to have basically an easy game but with a small amount of an adversary? People will often recommend this as the default, and you'll hear it all in these comments. But Betagin has a little bit of a problem with that. So they say, Prussia hits you hard and fast, but does little to punish your failure to scale. And I think this twists players' perceptions of how to play the game. So players finish up Prussia 6 and then they move on to a relatively quote-unquote easy adversary like France 6, play that in the same style, and then they suffer. And this is because France needs to be approached with a much more relaxed pace than Prussia. Interesting way to put it. So they say most edge case issues with France, in their opinion, are players playing too fast and getting burned by France's powerful rubber banding, which I had to ask them about, and I'll explain that in a moment. And then they say the whole dynamic of tempo control is virtually absent against Prussia. You just solve the most pressing issues when you can, no holding back. So, interesting comment here, and there's some sort of responses and things to this which I didn't put in, but just to go back to what that term there, the rubber banding term. So in this case, what they're referring to is the ability for them to rubber band or bounce back, show some kind of elasticity or bounce back ability. if anybody is familiar with the introduction to the dictionary of that term through football years ago, which is thematic for the all football jersey today, but that's for another day. But they're talking about the bounce back ability of France in this case, and they're basically saying here that they have mechanisms built in where if you're doing well well against them, they have a way to fight back. And they mentioned in the comments that other adversaries have this as well, where things like Habsburg Livestock, which we'll talk about another day, but they've got an ability where if you're doing too well and you don't have enough blight, they hurt you. You've got kind of Russia have the same sort of thing, where if you're stopping them ravaging and they don't place blight, they hurt you. So there's a whole bunch of other ways that certain different adversaries hurt you for doing well against them. And Prussia don't really have that. And I really do strongly agree with this, that, one example, by the way, with France is if you clear land, and we talked about this in the previous episode, if your board looks really clear and they go ahead and they explore into empty lands, they get this sort of roll-on mechanic where they can convert the explorers into buildings. So sometimes it's actually better for them to explore into a land that already contains a town and then build a city, because they don't add additional towns. Whereas if you explore into an empty land, that's 2 more towns in, so it kind of pushes the loss condition that way. So not to make this about France, but it's just a good point, and it's an interesting one that other adversaries have that, whereas Prussia doesn't really have it. If you solve the problems against Prussia early, especially, they don't really have a way to fight back, which is something I strongly agree with here, and I think that's sort of echoed in different ways among some of the other posts that other people are making here. So thanks, by the way, Betagin, really good input. So next up is Matt Cross then, and they say, BP, certainly in the adversary I play the most, as I'll play level 3 or 4 every time I'm trying a new spirit, so I don't have to keep track of too many other new rules. So here's Matt not necessarily saying that it's for new players to the game, but for them it's more about when they're trying new spirits. So unfortunately, I realize this has skewed my playstyle into playing very fast and aggressively, so even when I'm not playing BP, I'm still winning or losing by turn 7 or 8. And I think I need to learn to pick up a few more defense cards and give myself more time to grow. So that is, a conversation for a whole other day around sort of how you manage growth, and how you sort of, you build your spirit up over time using sort of growth options and play patterns and things like that, which they're still getting used to, and that's totally understandable. I think especially, I think I remember Matt saying before they're a newish player, somewhere near the start of the podcast. So they're mentioning here, for example, that BP is now my 2nd ever level 6 win, and once again came from the undisputed goal to bring her dreams and nightmares. So knowing it was a sprint race to fear victory, I ignored any card that wasn't destroying and generating tons of fear. What a rush. So well done. Massive congratulations, Matt. 2nd level 6 win. I know we were celebrating your first one only a couple of weeks ago, so you've got a second one under your belt. So really well done. And clearly here you're identifying a spot that is maybe a weak spot in your game. And I think this is really, really important. And I put this in here on purpose because I think sort of introspective reflection, and that's a term I'm going way off the deep end here into life and the meaning of life with that kind of comment, but really taking a moment to not sort of introspectively reflect, but to just to take note when you're playing a game of maybe where your mistakes were made and why, and not even necessarily how you could fix them on the spot, because a lot of times that's just not something you might really identify right there and then, but knowing where you made a mistake in a game is huge. And I've talked loads about Magic the Gathering in the past, and there was a period of time where I got playtesting with some guys in Dublin at the time who were the 2 best players in the country, comfortably, by far. They weren't Irish, which was good and sound of them, but they were guys who came in and I made friends with them, and I got playtesting with these guys, and they beat me every game, every time. They were way better than I was. I couldn't touch them. They were so much better than me. But the thing was, by losing to them over and over, I massively improved as a player. Exponentially improved versus probably the years prior to that moment. In 2 months or 3 months, I improved like, you know, maybe 2 or 3x what I was before. So, and it's because I just kept losing, and like I was forced to see where my problems were and how they were able to beat me. And like I said, it doesn't necessarily happen in the moment, in the spot. You don't necessarily look at a thing and go, okay, that's why it was. I have to do X next time. But you start to identify patterns, and you start to identify where issues are arising. And if you can spot that, that is by far the biggest step. Spotting the issue is actually probably in many ways easier than solving the issue, because you've got people to help you. You can ask your friends, you can ask people around the table. In that case, of course, I was asking the people who were beating me all the time. But in this case here, Matt's sort of saying, well, okay, I need to, for example, pick up maybe more defense cards, or maybe, you know, giving myself time to grow can mean a lot of things. That's maybe, like I said, pick different growth options. Maybe it's looking at cards like maybe Unrelenting Growth, or some of those sort of more growy type cards, or sort of spirit growth cards, as opposed to maybe necessarily something that plays directly to the board. So anyway, I spent more on that one, more time on that slide than I was intending to, and I certainly didn't intend to talk about my history of losing loads in Magic the Gathering. But yeah, that's the way things go, I guess. So next up here we've got at Sapien 0101. So I like the old 0101 there. That looks like binary code to me. So my tech background at least serves for something in here. But for me, Prussia is Spirit Island. I really like that sentence. Prussia is Spirit Island. So it's the closest thing the game comes to a default difficulty modulator. So every other adversary feels like a variant of the game. So this is cool. I like this, and I agree with it, actually, entirely. They're basically saying here that by forcing the cards to the front of the deck in the way that Prussia does, you're not changing the rules in any way. And we'll talk about this later in the game. We're going to do a real deep dive into actions. I meant to say this at the start of the episode. I meant to start doing this during my episodes, is kind of give a brief synopsis at the start of the episode on what's actually going to be in the episode, because I think that's just generally good practice for doing a presentation, and I should know better than that by now. But yes, we will spend some time later in the episode talking about actions and kind of how adversaries use them against you and things like that. So stick where you are, stick to your seat, and hold tight for some really in-depth analysis around action economy later on. So continuing on here, we've got Jonathan 4290. Perfect adversary for playing scenarios to your desired difficulty level without overloading yourself with complexity. Not a really nice comment, and I think, Jonathan, you're the only one who mentioned scenarios that I remember. And yeah, it's a perfect shout. You know, you want to play whatever, direct to hand insurrection or blitz or something like that, but you want to give yourself, you know, the same flavor of a game, but just more difficulty. You saw me do this, didn't you, during my my level, what did I call it? I think playthrough 1, I guess. The very first playthrough I did on the show here was that kind of blitz plus a bit of this plus a bit of that plus BP3 plus whatever. So I'll go ahead and I'll link this up here. If you're joining new, you can go and click the link for the playthrough 1, and that sort of crazy game. But yeah, the scenarios and the adversary there clearly was combining in a way that's complementary without necessarily throwing the rules too far in one direction. So next up then we have Damoel saying, I don't play them often. They're a cool adversary and make for some interesting games, but I'm not a fan of the quickened pace usually. I just enjoy the experience of getting to play the game for a while and both sides feeling all leveled up in an epic struggle. So that said, if there's a time limit, BP is absolutely the best adversary. And also, once I start doing dual adversaries, I feel like BP's simplicity will be a good way to learn the dynamics. So they talk here about, obviously, the sort of quick and pace, which other people have picked up on, and they say about sort of leveling up you and the adversary sort of leveling up and getting both kind of building towards this maybe late game. Something like England would be a good example of where that happens. But here, clearly, that's not the case. You're not building really towards a late game of any description. You're just looking to get out there and kind of get your sort of early game rolling, which some other commenters have picked up on. But I like this as well here. So once I start doing dual adversaries, so adversary combos, I feel like BP simplicity will be a good way to learn the dynamics. So I think this very much lines up with the previous commenter who was saying about how with scenarios they sort of fit in quite well so that it doesn't again throw the rules too much. So I think here again a reasonable comment where you assume if you're Damuel that BP is really good to go and put into adversary combinations, but in comes at BWEM at Boem, and Boem says BP2 is brutal in combo adversary games. So they're here to rain on the parade of our previous commenter, and they're saying that early stage 3 with escalation is a ton of invader power before the spirits are ready. Especially with something like Sweden 4+, you can just outright lose when that card hits Ravage. And I wanted to obviously link these two together. I found this quite funny. So, you know, what the previous commenter was saying about rules complexity, yes, it's absolutely true. Some of the adversary combos get super fiddly and crazy, and you get some weird interactions happening between the adversary rules. But in obviously in BP's case, that doesn't happen. You don't really do any extra rules overhead, but getting your stage 3 card up to the front of the deck hits hard. So if you can imagine, if you've never done adversary combos before, pick any of your favorite adversaries to play against, and think about just taking the regular deck, like France, for example. France have an unchanged invader deck, if I'm not mistaken. You imagine just playing against France and then tag BP6 onto that. You now play France with the BP6 deck where the stage 3 is coming up at the start, and then you also tack on, as they say here, the stage 3 escalation. So if you're not familiar, you also do escalations on your stage 3 cards as well as your stage 2 cards. So it's a whole hell of a ton of fun. Yeah, clearly that's what Gwen was is getting at here. But they do say that I don't find them boring at all. So Race Against the Deck is its own thing that no other adversary gives, really, and it's not vanilla in the slightest. And they said, like another commenter said, everything that's supposed to work, negating explorers, builds, defend, retaliate, it's all viable. So the whole kit is available to solve the problems presented. So yeah, totally agree there. So up next then, it's at Social Justice Cleric 7. So they say kind of middle of the road. The simple rules make it a good first adversary and a good choice for relatively quick and easy games. So it's also versatile in terms of effective strategy. So I think, again, echoing what the previous comment said, control works okay, defense works okay, offense works okay. It's not one of my favorite adversaries, though, because I really like having the time to grow spirits big and powerful, and BP games just don't last long enough for maxed out spirits. So again, that's a bit of a repeat of what we heard before. So now here's an interesting one. So Dark Dirigible Titan, they come in and say BP5, board D, wetlands, wetlands jungles, wetlands, coastal lands, jungles. Invader deck is a rite of passage for anybody moving to high difficulty. So edge cases like this are why people say BP level 5 can counterintuitively be harder than level 6. And that's just kind of weird for an adversary. So I'm going to stop here. They do say more, but I'm stopping here because that paragraph hit me, actually. I had never heard this. And someone else I think mentions it in the comment as well. I had never seen this written anywhere, that BP level 5 can sometimes be considered harder than level 6, and that's why, because they say in this setup that they just mentioned, it goes wetlands as your first explorer, which is your stage 1 card. If you remember, BP 5 has just a single stage 1 card at the start, so if that's wetlands, then you hit your stage 3 card, which is wetlands jungles, then you hit your stage 2 card, which is wetlands, and then you hit another stage 2 card, which is coastal lands, and then jungles at the last one, just to rub in the extra jungle flavor. But that basically goes wetlands, 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 and then because you're on board D, you've got 2 coastal wetlands. So you essentially hit wetlands 4 times in a row at the start of the game, which is outrageous. And like they said, that can actually counterintuitively be harder than starting with the stage 3 card, because in that case, if you start with the stage 3 card, you knock off that first wetlands and it's one less wetlands in a row. So you know what, I can hear it. I can actually hear this argument, and I think this is one where we'll talk about again this later on, but there's a big difference between when that kind of runner or that back-to-back that they're talking about here. When that happens, there's a huge difference between if you're able to deal with those lands versus if you're not. And that's all I'll say right now. We'll come back to that later. But I'll continue on here with Dark Dirigible Titan's comment. They say that BP games feel won or lost after like 3 to 4 turns. There's no comeback mechanic like Russia's Fear Bombs or Scotland's Inland Town ads. It's high tempo, fast games where one lucky turn against them can cause them to crumble with no hope of recovery. So spirits whose optimal builds start slowly and underplay in the early turns, someone like Lightning or Voice, can feel incredible pressure to change their play patterns to deal with that early stage 3 card. And in my opinion, the best thing an adversary can do is make you reconsider the play patterns for your spirit. So the best games of Spirit Island are the ones where you're forced to think on your feet and constantly improvise new plans, never quite sure if you made the right decisions until it's way too late to change them. And Brandenburg-Prussia can make you do that from turn 1. Just unfortunately, they can't do that after turn 4. which I quite like the end of a really long epic paragraph about how great Brandenburg-Prussia are doing this thing, but they only do it for like 3 turns and then they stop doing that. So I laughed at that. But yeah, look, I do really agree with that. I personally love when something in a game throws a spanner in the works, and I especially love when it throws a spanner in the work against sometimes what can be considered the big bad strong things, and then it's like, no, you're back on our level now, bucko. Get down here and figure yourself out, because there's no way you're sitting around and underplaying for 2 turns in a row or whatever it was that you're planning. So nice comment. Thank you, Dark Dirigible Titan. Next we have Gooseman. So Gooseman as a gamer comes in and says, I'd be curious to see stats on whether BP games are actually shorter. So the average game of Spirit Island tends to leave 4 or so invader cards unused anyway. Strong agree. I don't know and haven't played enough high-level BP to have a feel for it, but it seems possible. So thank you, Gooseman. And I have another comment right here that's quite similar, where Putting Stuff Off says, often people say BP leads to short games, and I don't quite agree. It certainly doesn't allow for long games, but against most adversaries, England notwithstanding, I'm aiming to win by turn 8 fast either way, and that's how long BP 6 gives you anyway. And this is a sort of a dual comment thing. Obviously Gooseman and Putting Stuff Off here is sort of talking around the same point, and I absolutely agree. I am going to pick this up a little bit later on, so I won't dig into it here, but yes, strong agree here. Yes, they put pressure on you, but does it actually make for shorter games? Not so sure. So up next then we've got Cappy. I still keep seeing this and just thinking Coopa, but yeah, we're going to call you Cappy from now on, Cappy. So El Capitan says, BP is fair in the sense that every spirit can beat level 6 without needing tremendous luck. So some spirits are going to struggle more than others, namely the ones who don't have the early action economy. Hey, there you go. To handle the first 4 land ravage. But even those spirits probably could have over a 50% win rate. So outside of the very small handful of spirits that suffer from that issue, you can expect to win with good gameplay, barring bad luck. And they mentioned devastating events on that first ravage, which get amplified by BP's early pace advantage. And yes, absolutely, if you hit the wrong event on that first ravage and it throws all a spanner into the works that you've been planning, you're probably in big trouble. It also comes in the form of triple dipping land 2 or 3. And they say land 1 is less bad since it doesn't start with a building, which is fair. But they say, I honestly think BP and Sweden are fairly similar in the sense that after the first couple turns, you'll know if it's an easy game or a difficult game. And that's, again, sort of echoing some of the other comments here. But they do say one funny thing is that the super OP spirits are so busted, they can actually punish invaders for exploring into the pre-built lands. So they're talking about the lands like land 2, land 3 would already start with with your buildings. They say they can punish the invaders, and they say here that the fastest game that they won was during the turn 3 Ravage, because Hard Vigil was able to organize devastating counterattacks. And that doesn't surprise me in the least, because Hard Vigil is broken and it's way too powerful. So that is certainly not a BP problem. That is a Hard Vigil problem. So we will we'll continue on here. Next up, I think we've got a handful of comments left here. Yeah, there's only one or two. So up here we have at BST 1994 says, Brandenburg-Prussia has a lesson. Play around your back-to-backs. That's just exactly what Cappy was saying in the previous comment there. So here they add some stats which I quite like. So you're guaranteed a coastal explorer on turn 1, except for board D, because of course it has a double up on wetlands there, and you have a 40% chance of it getting hit with a back-to-back. So there you go. Take a moment to appreciate that. So on every board except board D, you're guaranteed a coastal explorer, because you've got 3 different terrain types and you're hitting 2 of them. So you're guaranteed to hit at least 1, and you have a 40% chance for the land that you hit. You have a 40% chance of it getting hit with a back-to-back, because you then hit your stage 2 card. You've got 5 stage 2 cards, 1 of each terrain type and 1 of coastal. So you've basically got 2 different shots to hit your coastal that you explored in turn 1 here. So 40% chance of the back-to-back coastal is really high. And then there's a 60% chance at least 1 land re-explores, and it's possible to have back-to-backs every turn for the entire game. And I never really thought or appreciated this until I read it, but I went and I looked and I thought about it myself. So against Brandenburg-Prussia, it's possible to have back-to-backs every turn for the entire game. So what does that look like? You hit a stage 3 card, then you hit a stage 2, which is whatever. Let's say you hit Wetlands Jungles as your opening explorer, then you hit Wetlands as your next card, then you hit Coastal, which doubles up on one of the wetlands that you had, for example. And then the following turn you hit like a Jungles or something, which was also coastal. And then you go ahead and you hit like Jungle Sands, then you hit like Sands Mountain, etc., etc. So every single invader card that you had there doubles up in some way and gives you a back-to-back in at least 1 land. Or terrain type, I guess, depending on where the coastal land hits. But that's tough. I mean, like I said a few minutes ago, again, I'm going to pick up on it later, but if you can't deal with a back-to-back, it hits hard. And that is a big part of the power from Brandenburg-Prussia, so you really, really need to be aware of it. But they do say here, if you clear a land with the hand and it re-explores, you get way ahead. But there's a good chance you'll get punished for letting lands go. So you have to be strategic about which ones to deal with. And that's very well put. Last up, very, very simple, from at Mr. Fenrir. Prussia's my favourite adversary. It punishes you when you play badly, and it rewards you for playing well. And I could not have ended that on a more succinct and poetic ending than Mr. Fenrir. So thank you, Mr. Fenrir, for that one. Thank you, everybody who I've just comments I've just read out, and a whole pile of extra thanks here go to a list of people I'll quickly read, which is JMoon33, Cool Pablu 7, Cyanoid, Rombaro Brewing, Gooey Gungan, Table 61, No Scene 2295, Say No to Drugs, Beat of Knowledge, Shral 79, Not Brandon Jaspers, Choir 87, Setravri Maggie 123, Dancia 43, So Tired of America, Penny Guinea Pig, The Eternal 792, Fifth Guy 85, and finally OK Kaleidoscope 4080. Thank you all so much for your comments, as well as everybody who's I read. There's a whole bunch of stuff that were added there that kind of overlapped on a lot of the same kind of points around. You know, they're enjoyable, you know, yet difficult. They have low rules overhead, you know, quick games. Maybe they're a bit boring. You know, adapting the rules. Table 61 came in with a big long comment around sort of what they saw about the rules and kind of how some of the kind of difficulty maybe slightly needed to be adjusted. And they gave a couple of rules variants as well there. So I didn't read that one out, but it was a bit long. But Tables, some really nice ideas in there. So please do go read that one, everybody. And some other stuff around kind of, you know, how well you understand and play your spirit is what matters, rather than sort of necessarily any one specific thing. So some really, really good comments in there. Thank you, huge amount to everybody who provided those. And as before, exactly like I think what happened with France last time out, we just covered so much of what I would say and what I was intending on saying as part of the analysis here, which is really, really nice. And the reason I was so high on getting community input at the beginning and now and going forward is I could sit here and talk for whatever it's been, 49 minutes now. And I'll probably talk for, truth be told, another 49 minutes. Best case scenario, probably from now, because I've got my own analysis to kind of go through. But, everything that people just went through there is massively relevant, and you cover so much of what I was going to say anyway. So, getting the flavor and the texture and the voice and the personality of everybody in as part of this makes it come alive so much more to me, and hopefully to everybody who's listening, especially to you if your name was read out, and maybe to you if you're sitting and thinking, hey, you know what, I'd like my input in here. I'd like my voice to be heard. I've got something either fun or funny or interesting or somehow dynamic to say. Like, I want to get part. I want to be part of that. And I talked again. I said it before about the Kindred Spirit podcast. Like when I was listening to their content and hearing, T-Ips and all the others, Mr. Wolf and all the rest, and I still see some of the names floating around on the Reddit these days. Like, I was like, God, I would have loved that to have been me. I would have loved to have been in there. I would have loved to have been part of that conversation. And I never got to do it. But you listening right now, if this is reaching your ears, you get to be part of it. You're here. You're now. You're in the present, modern day. And please, I'd love to hear what you have to say. So again, if you want to be part of the conversation, YouTube comments is a great place to be. I talked about obviously Reddit and the How Do You Feel series. I link them every time, also as part of the description. So again, I will, of course, right now in the description, I'll link. I can't do the floaty thing, not yet. I think later, once you reach a certain threshold of, I don't know, views or followers or something, which all of you are contributing towards. So thank you. Keep going. But once I hit that, then I can do the floaty thing. So I can float and link it to, go and hit this and click on Reddit. But for now, I can only do floaty things for videos on YouTube. So everything else will be linked down in the comments. So let's stop here. Let's get a sip of beer. Yeah, beer's full of flavour. My God, 9.45%. I think they use like 10 hops or something like that in it. 8 hops in the kettle. Yeah, wow. Very, very nice. We'll pour ourselves a little bit of water to keep hydrated, of course. Because it's important to be hydrated, folks. If you're sitting at home right now and you're feeling a little dehydrated, that's not a great place to be. Go and get yourself a drink. Otherwise, hopefully you're back. We're going to dig in and we're going to talk about the adversary analysis from my perspective, let's say. Now, what we did before on the previous episodes is we kind of had 2 sections where I would do a breakdown of kind of strategy and tactics that work well into an adversary. And then I would sort of follow that up with maybe some cards or effects that sort of complement that discussion. Let's say the 2 would, of course, go hand in hand here. What I'm going to do right now is similar. I am going to spend some time doing a deep dive this time. So you remember, last time we did the sort of event breakdown with France because it made sense, right? With France event breakdown, I wanted to have an episode that was kind of dedicated to that a little bit anyway. So that's what we did last time. And each episode, I'm going to try to theme a little bit around when we get to this kind of strategy, tactics sort of section, I'll sort of theme it a bit and we'll do a deep dive on something that's relevant to each adversary. And I have them planned out. So for a while I was kind of winging it, but I took some time recently and I kind of broke it all down and I've got some kind of planned out stuff. So I'm really looking forward to how all of those shake out. And I've also done the same with my spirits as well. So again, I was winging that for a while. I was kind of just like every week I'd look and see what spirits worked well for one matchup. But then I realized I'm going to start running out of spirits here. I should probably plan this a little bit better. So I also have my plan for all of the spirits in the in the adversary series. But again, a little bit off topic. What I'm trying to say here is we've reached this section now, and I'm going to do a breakdown, as I mentioned before, around action economy. Now, I'm going to get to it in a second, but I'm going to start and I'm going to talk about what Brandenburg-Prussia do. And I mentioned action economy because it's relevant for this. So we'll start first of all about, again, summarization of everything we've just heard from everybody else here. If I can summarize it in 3 points, because it really does break down, I think, into 3 things. What do Brandenburg-Prussia do to beat you? First thing they do is they hit you with an early stage 3 card. That's first and foremost, and probably the most important thing that they do is they put that stage 3 card up front and center. And what do I mean by that? I mean, if you're playing against Brandenburg-Prussia 6, which is what I did in my game, you'll see it first. But if you're not so comfortable with level 6 adversaries, that's okay. You get your stage 3 card about sort of second or third or whatever it is, but you get hit hard with that as well. And that is super tough. No matter whether you're playing BP3 or 4, like some of the people said, or whether it's level 6 or whatever, like getting that stage 3 card in there early and getting you out of your comfort zone hurts. So that's the first thing that they do. The second thing that they do, which is probably only just behind, I think you kind of first place is the stage 3 card, but in very close second place in terms of how they beat you is the runner lands. The runner, or what other people call the back-to-back. I call it a runner. If anyone listening is familiar with the term, it comes up in poker a lot. So I used to play poker as well as Magic the Gathering back in the day. I played quite a bit of online poker, and that's a term that I learned from there. And what it means is you basically need to hit 2 things in a row. So very simply, if my opponent has 3 aces and I've got 2 kings, I now need to hit runner, king to be able to beat them. So that runner term is used all the time, where you can't just hit 1 card, you need to hit 2 in a row. And I just port that over into this game. So you're back to back or you're runner, and clearly here in this case, as we heard from one of the previous comments, they can hit runner like 8 turns in a row, and that is literally, like I said, only barely in second place to how they hit you early and hard. And what I've written here is I'll come back to that now in a second, because I'll mention my point 3 first. The third thing that they do, and for me this is way in third place, this is miles back in third place. First 2 are very close together, and then you've got a giant gap. And then the third thing that they do is they beat you with the invader deck, or they pressure you with the invader deck. Of course, it's a lost condition, there's only 8 cards left, yes, but like the pressure of that in your game versus the pressure of the other 2 things are miles apart. So, but that is the third thing. That's clearly the third thing. They don't have other really special rules. They've got very little in terms of adding additional plastic. We talked about, they put 1 town at the start of the game, and then they put a handful with their escalation across the game, and that's it. So really, the way Brandenburg-Prussia beat or tried to beat you is with early and compounding action economy. I'll take a second, let that settle and let that breathe just for a second there. Early action economy and compounding action economy. So those 2 things, what do they mean? Very simply, early action economy is they front load their actions. Okay? So a stage 3 card at the beginning, it's twice as much as a standard card, right? It's 2 terrains as opposed to 1, 4 lands ravaging as opposed to 2, etc. It's early action economy. And the other thing is compounding action economy, which essentially means, for me, I've invented these terms, by the way. If you go Googling them or something like that, you probably won't find a search result, because I came up with this while I was kind of preparing the show. But that compounding factor of 1 land and then runner into the same land, if you miss and you haven't solved that land the first time around, and you cross your fingers and hope you miss on the runner, if you hit it, you're in big trouble, because they've probably gone, like, if you haven't dealt with it the first time, it's probably one of your city lands, so you've probably got, like, explore, town, city, then it explores again, then it builds again, then it ravages again. Like, it's a disaster. And if they hit you with that compounding action economy, and what do I mean by the compounding? Let me clarify there. What it means in that case is they're not just hitting you with an explore, build, ravage. the second time, they're hitting you with Explore, Build, Ravage plus Blight Cascade plus, you know, more buildings in the land, you know, that kind of thing. So the second time around, it's worse than just two individually on their own, if you get me. This compounding factor. And look, don't get me wrong, Brandenburg-Prussia aren't the only adversary who do this. Like, you can get this across any game of Spirit Island, right? Base 0 difficulty. Once you go from stage 1 to stage 2, you can hit it, and of course from stage 2 to stage 3, you can hit it easily. And if you hit your coastal lands, of course, is another opportunity to hit this. So, you know, BP aren't alone in being able to create that compounding effect, but they hit you much harder with it because it's a lot harder to stop that stage 3 card at the start. And as some of the commenters mentioned, they have various different configurations of their deck that can give you multiple options to get that in a row. So whether it's BP5 that hits you with a 1, then a 3, then a 2, whether it's BP6 that hits you with a 3 and a 2, or even some level in between, even one of those levels in and around level 3 or level 4, they also do that same thing where they kind of go 1 1 3 2, and you get those kind of 3 lands in a row that could really, really hurt you. So that's what it is. It's early and it's compounding. I'll leave that there and I'll let that settle for just a moment, and then I'll continue on. So that's kind of how they attack you. So let's spend a bit of time then thinking about how we can stop that. How do we combat that sort of early and compounding effect? What can we do? And again, action economy here is the most important thing. I'll just spend a moment before we get into action economy, and I'll talk about, you know, before we did this kind of sliding scale where I sort of went from good to bad. In this case, you don't really have a bad, quite honestly. There's almost nothing that's bad against Brandenburg-Prussia. I think I was listening to Red Revenge's, episode on this recently, and I think one of the only things he mentioned that was bad was blight removal. And I don't even hate blight removal against BP, honestly. Blight removal is not great, full stop, across the whole game. I'm not really a fan of it. I don't really use it. I think it's very good against Russia, which we'll talk about in another episode, of course, and I think it's basically not really useful against anybody else. It's okay in some other matchups. I think it's very good against Russia and only okay or bad in other matchups. And here I think it's okay. Yes, it's a kind of it's a delay tactic. It's the type of thing that like slows the game slightly. I'll let them ravage, then I'll remove the blight, and then, you know, they can ravage again without me having to worry about it. So yes, it's a sort of a slow burn because you're not dealing with the land, you're not stopping anything really except a blight cascade, but sometimes that's all you need. A blight removal in the right kit can be effective and powerful here, but only in the right kit. So be very clear about that. Picking a random blight removal card when you're doing a draft in a random spirit isn't really going to be it. I'm gonna agree, and I'm gonna say no, that's not what you want to be doing. But if you're playing this type of spirit that either the elements work on the card you've just found, or you've got some kind of game plan. We talked before about having a strategy and having an end game state in mind. If I found maybe a major power already that gives me my win condition, and the only thing I need is a turn or two of time to get there, well, then a blight removal card is fine. And like I said, pretty much everything works into Brandenburg-Prussia. So if you've got a plan and you've got, I think really here what we're talking about is having a coherent game plan. So whether that means having a balanced approach and having a bit of defend and a bit of the hand movement and a bit of control and a bit of this and a bit of that, as long as you have a coherent plan that gets you to where you need to be on time, so you've baked in enough removal, fear, whatever to get you there, no problem. But if you want to kind of throw all that in the bin and you want to go like one of our, I think it was Matt Cross mentioned with Bring Her Dreams and Nightmares, I just threw everything else in the bin and I went balls to the wall fear, and I only took cards that dealt damage and did the kind of shadow damage from Bringer, and that got me over the line, and I essentially turned it into one big race. That can also work. Fear spamming and fear sprinting can be a thing against Brandenburg-Prussia as well. So, again, there was a coherent game plan. It wasn't a balanced game plan at all, but it was coherent. He had a plan to get there. He could map out and say, I've got X amount of turns, I've got X amount of fear left in the pool. Yeah, I'll throw the rest of it out. I can probably take the next four ravages. I'll maybe take 2 blight cascades. Maybe I'll do like 1 blight removal, and then all I'll do is spam fear, and I'll get over the line just on time. So that's enough, I think, of all of that. We are going to stop now for some beer, of course. A little water and a breath or two, because I probably haven't breathed properly in about 1 hour, 3 minutes, 41 seconds. This stuff isn't as easy as it looks, honestly. I've spent my career for years and years doing a lot of presentations. I speak a lot on camera and things like that. I think I mentioned that before during my introduction episode, but yeah, it's it's hard to find the breath in the sentence because you don't want dead air, right? And that's a thing I've talked about in the kind of playthroughs on the table, and sort of filling in terms of what my thoughts are in a moment and all of that. You've got things to say, but you need to you need to breathe, especially if you're drinking 9.5% beer. You got to breathe, because doing that and not breathing is probably a terrible idea. Anyway, action economy. So that's up next, right? So, I said we're going to do a deep dive in it. I mentioned action economy way back in one of the first episodes. I think it was after I did that, the Blitz episode I mentioned, the Blitz playthrough. And I kind of picked up on a couple of things, like I think pocketing was one. And there was a couple of small things that I spent about 30 seconds, throw away, sort of brief description on what they are. But we're coming back to action economy today. This is about to get a little heavy. It's about to get a little detailed and a little descriptive. But please do bear with me here. We're not going and doing any sort of algorithms or math problems or anything like that. But we'll get a little bit into it. And hopefully this is kind of helpful for you, or for most of you, or for all of you. I had to stop and actually think about this, because action economy is a term that gets used all the time in Spirit Island, in other strategy games, and so on. So it has its roots in D&D, Dungeons and Dragons, as far as I'm aware. I should have confirmed that. I was reading this yesterday and I should have written it on my slide. I didn't, but I believe it's D&D. And I'm going to look at this in kind of 3 levels. There's 3 sort of almost phases or something that I'll look at this at. So we're going to start here, and we're going to talk about, first of all, what are the basics of action economy. So we talked before about the adversaries' actions. We'll get to them in a moment, but we're starting with the spirits. So first of all, here we've got spirit action economy. Now, it's a concept basically that judges how much a character can do in a turn. So like I said, in D&D, you've got various actions. You can move, you can attack, you can do whatever, right? In Spirit Island, you could sort of, the parallel you draw there is quite simply, how much can a spirit do in a turn? And that's kind of the absolute most basics of it. Some of the questions you're basically saying here is, how many actions do they have? And action, of course, is a key word in Spirit Island here. We're going to use the word action a lot in the next few minutes, probably 10 15 minutes, whatever it's going to be. For the most part, when I use action in this section of the episode here, I will be mostly referring to something that's a quote-unquote action with an uppercase A in the game of Spirit Island. Now, if I get a situation where there's maybe something that's like, that's not an action, it's a modifier or whatever, don't hold me kind of at ransom over that stuff. I haven't done a direct one-to-one mapping with every single thing here. There will be maybe some of these things that aren't, called an action in the game, or that's called an action tree, or it's a modifier, or it's a whatever, right? So don't hold me, as I say, up on that one. What we're talking about here is an action. It's something you do in the game. It's an effect, right? So the term action economy is what we're talking about. So I'm going to stick to the word action because it's easier. But hopefully you get the idea there. So the questions that I was talking about were, one of them is how many actions you have. Just that's it. How many? Count them, right? And we can be talking here, obviously, about powers that we play. We can be talking about our innate powers. We can be talking about potentially special rules. And again, that's where that grey area is about, is it an action or isn't it? Don't worry about it. We can count special rules in here. As long as they're doing something, that's fine. But even more than how many, in terms of how many actions there are. The other question, the big question, is how much can those actions achieve? That's a really important point there, and it's a really important distinction as well. It's not always the case that more actions equals more achieving more. It usually is, and very often it's a very good rule of thumb, but it's something to come back to. Second thing is, what are some of the metrics that matter within that we might look at? Things like how many card plays do we have? That's usually a very good indicator of your actions in terms of how many actions you have or how much you can achieve is how many card plays you have. It's pretty straightforward. How well or how easily or how often can you hit your innate powers? And again, which levels of them, right? Not necessarily just level 1, but how high can you get on those innates? That's a kind of a basic metric that we'd look at there. And then another thing that we'd look at clearly here is, do we get any kind of free abilities? Do we have stuff like our growth options giving us extra actions? Do we have track bonuses? A lot of spirits do. Finder's got a really cool one at the very, very end. I don't know if I've ever even unlocked it because, you usually don't get there, but it's pretty good. You get to move like a city or something. You push like one town or city or something out of one of your lands, or I guess push one invader out of your land. So things like that are free actions, right? Things like when you grow with wildfire, when you place your presence, that's an action, you deal damage. So there's a whole bunch of other ways that you get these kind of quote unquote free abilities, right? Your special rules, all that other kind of stuff. So there's some of the sort of very key core fundamentals around what action economy is. And if you've been listening, or you're just sort of familiar, you read what other people put out in terms of content and things like that, a lot of it will sort of stop there. And I did a similar thing with tempo when we talked about tempo against, I think it was against Sweden. I started out with the sort of basic definition, and I did a similar thing where I said, a lot of times that's it in terms of tempo, right? That's what you would have, and people would kind of call it a day almost. And for me here, again, spirit sort of action economy, you'd almost call it a day with what I just said. How many actions do we have? How much can they achieve? How many card plays do you have? How well do you hit your innates? That kind of thing. So they're the kind of basics of it. Now, before I move on, I'm also going to, because we're talking about basics here, I actually decided I'd do a little bit of a breakdown of what the actions you can achieve as a spirit in this game are. And I was quite surprised, actually. It's quite a long list, so forgive me here. I'm just going to give you the little laundry list of what they are, but I thought it was nice to sort of take stock a little bit in terms of what are the actual actions you generally achieve, or the effects maybe. Again, this uppercase action is maybe something that someone will pull me up on, but again, what are the general effects that you can do as a spirit? So we've got invader interaction, and that will often look like defend, control invaders, which is like push, gather, so on. Deal damage or destroy, put them in the same bracket there. Remove, downgrade, or replace invaders, which are slightly different, as you know. And then you've got things like skip, prevent, or even change invader actions. Skip everything in the land, or maybe instead of ravage, build, and so on. So that's our kind of invader actions. Then we've got sort of board and management actions, not necessarily specifically invader actions, and that can look like things like control or change the behavior of the hand. So change of behavior might mean like make them not be able to change, like stubborn solidity from stone, or things like +2 or +4 health from something like Heart Vigil special rules, so things like that. You have things like add tokens. So you've got obviously all the different various types of tokens and what they do, but adding tokens is a kind of an action that you do. You've got isolated land. You have move, add, destroy, or return destroyed presence. So there's a whole bunch of things you can do with presence there. Obviously, adding them from your tracks is clearly the best of that lot, but there are other things you can do. Then you can add, remove, or move blight. Or in fact you can convert it. I haven't got it written down, but I just remember transforming wildfire can convert blight. I think I can't remember exactly. It says remove it and then add a battleland, so maybe it doesn't convert it. But then you also have finally here some of the most epic stuff you can do in the game is add, remove, or change island tiles. So clearly here, add and remove. There's two cards that can do one of each, but you can also change island tiles a little bit. You can do things like weave together the fabric of place, where you can kind of join some lands. Next up, we've got spirits then. So what can spirits do in terms of their actions? Well, you can, or how do you do things to spirits? Well, you can do things like you can reclaim one or more. You can give energy or gain energy. You can give repeats. You can give or gain cards. You can give elements. You can give extra card plays. You can increase range, and you can change the speed of a card. And I think I got all them. That's obviously all the sort of general utility type effects in the game here. I think I got everything there. If I didn't, let me know in the comments, please. And then finally, then in terms of slightly doesn't really fall into the other three categories here, and I put this more in game progression category. I call this generate fear, which is clearly one of the sort of key things that you do in a game. And then you've got add, remove, or change cards in a deck, which is some actions that come up, not very often, but they come up here and there. You've got that new major from Nature Incarnate that can ports ships, ports, something or other. God, I can't remember what that card's called. I didn't get anywhere near. I don't think it's a very good card. I've never used it, but it's cool. And it's got Vengeance in the artwork, so I'll bring it up on screen here. But you've got that one, and then you've got Fractured Days can do some cool stuff there. And then, of course, you've got some kind of events and things that do it as well. But look, anyway, long story short is there is the laundry list, top to bottom, as far as I could tell, of every action that you can take in the game. But clearly here, be very careful and be very aware. And I'm going to go back to this question I asked at the very top of this little section here. It's how many actions do you have and how much can those actions achieve? So an action does not necessarily map one-to-one to an outcome. And that is a key point that we're going to come back to very, very shortly. But next section is we're going to take a step back for a moment. So we've defined kind of what the actions that a spirit or spirits or team or whatever can take. What are the invaders' actions? We already said up front here a little bit around BP and how they sort of front load their actions. And let's take a moment here to kind of define what invader actions look like. Because of course you have spirits and you have spirit actions and you've got a spirit action economy. But in the similar vein, you've got adversaries and they take actions and they have their own action economy. So what does it look like? First of all, you've got kind of basic actions, right? The baseline sort of core fundamentals here. What do? They explore. We know all this, by the way, as well. There's nobody listening to me here is not going to really get the sort of basics of some of the stuff I'm saying here, but bear with me here. This is all kind of coming together into a kind of a bigger picture. So I'm taking it step by step, and I don't want to jump too quickly because, you know me, I don't jump quickly. If there's one way I don't jump, it's quickly. I don't jump at all. I'm far too lazy and I'm unfit for that kind of stuff. I drink beer, I'd not jump, but that's neither here nor there. Okay, so you've got explore. Then you've got build. Now, in this case, you know, you can build a town or you can build a city, and they're slightly different actions and they clearly have slightly different outcomes and impacts on your game. But again, we'll keep it simple and we'll call it build. Then you've got Ravage. And again, of course, with Ravage, not every Ravage looks the same. If I Ravage with an Explorer, it does nothing and it's fine, unless it's Russia. But for the most part, you know, Ravaging can be fine, or it can add Blight, and maybe it can kill the hand. So, you know, but again, Ravage is your kind of core action there. Escalation, I sort of kept in here as I sort of just categorized it and I gave it its own little title here, and I called it escalation. Clearly here there's all sorts of different types of escalations, but the escalation action in itself is the core fundamental component. Similarly, you have coastal lands, which is a component. It's an action that the spirits can take, which is different to a standard explorer. So again, you know, if I want to use sort of correct terminology here, this would be a little bit more like a modifier than it would be its own core action. But you know, again, bear with me here. Give me the benefit of the doubt a little bit here. So coastal is clearly here one of the actions which BP can potentially use very strongly against you because it can come so early. And the other one then after coastal is of course stage 3. So stage 3 is again another action type that they can take against you. Again, it's more a modifier on those first 3, explore, build, ravage, by doing it multiplied by 2. But you know, again, we'll call it an action for now for the purposes of this. And finally, the other sort of last action category that invaders can take is that they can win the game. right? So at the very base level, they can win by either running you out of invader cards, or they run you out of blight. They're your kind of two main loss conditions. And again, really here, this is a little bit more like a modifier in terms of, or it's an end state for the list of actions that came before. Again, ravaging multiple times over time will lead towards a loss condition, the same way explores over time will lead to a loss condition on your invader cards. But I just gave those, I kind of gave them each their own action. And again, right now, in terms of the fine definitions or the fine tuning of the definitions here, we're not talking about mathematic equations or algorithms here, so it doesn't really matter whether or not they are plus or minus in terms of it should be an action or not. That's not what we're getting at. It's more general, and you'll start to understand what I mean as we go along. But the other things here, then clearly here with invaders, then as soon as you get into adversaries, they've got advanced actions and they can do all sorts of stuff, right? So with the kind of things we talked about before, when they explore, well, now what can they do? They can add extra explorers, they can make them harder to kill, they can make them, attack for more. You can, when you're building, you can do things like you can build redundancy into building, where things like England and Habsburg livestock can kind of hurt you even when you try to stop their build. They can add extra buildings, they can make them harder to kill, that type of thing. And then when we talk about ravage, there's obviously ways that invaders can attack for more. They can ravage instead of build. They can do things like ravage in extra lands if you've got like multiple invaders in one land and things like that. So there's different ways that they can kind of make you ravage more and more often. And then finally, of course, you've got all the extra loss conditions, which we will talk about as we talk through each adversary. But even BP, they sort of create their own sort of loss condition in a sense that we talked about, which is speeding up the original loss condition of running out of cards. So that's invader actions, right? We all know them, we all love them, we all hate them, all of that kind of good stuff, right? But that's what they are. So we've now talked about the basics of the component pieces of a spirit's actions, and we've talked about the component pieces of an invader's actions. We've also alluded to how BP front load their invader actions. They don't really get extra. They don't really get fancy stuff. They don't take from that second pile I just talked about there, which is the sort of advanced actions. They keep it simple. They use the basic actions, but they front load them. So then, when we talk about action economy, for me, it's really important then to not just look about what we talked about in this sort of first of three sections. So I'm now going into my third, by the way, of three. So I had three sections in there. I had the basics of a spirit's actions, I had the basics of an invader's actions, and now the third thing is sort of balancing and comparing and lining the two up. And seeing how one compares to the other. And for me, this is the crux of where action economy really comes to life. Because it doesn't really matter ultimately how many actions you take in a vacuum. It always matters for me, it's more important of how does an action economy line up against the invader economy, and how well or not am I progressing against their progression. And that is the core part of this. And clearly here, I mean, again, this isn't really surprising anybody, when we talk about game design and good components and good ways to construct a strategy game or something like this. This is where the balance lives and dies, is how well you, as an individual, when you progress in the game, how well does your progression line up against the progression of whether it's your opponents, if you're playing a sort of a competitive game, or whether it's a set of invaders or some sort of what's the word I'm looking for, automa or something in a game like this, when you're a competitive team and you're playing against the game itself. So again, finding the right balance on that is what it's all about here. So let's talk a little bit about what that looks like. So first of all, a very simple definition of what an economy is, in one sentence here, it's a social domain associated with the production, use, and management of resources. Production and use being key here, and this is giving you that kind of idea of supply versus demand. We talked about this last time, right? The kind of give versus take, the push versus pull here. So they're talking about production and use, or consumption in this case. And for me here, this draws very closely with action versus outcome. So in this case, you've got your production, which is your action, and then the use of that, which is a little bit like your outcome versus the invader. How are you using the action to sort of progress against the invader? So you have the action itself, what you do, and you have the outcome is what you achieve. And here, this is where the crux of the whole thing is. It is not about how many actions you generate, it's about the number of outcomes that you achieve with those actions. That is the real fundamental bit I want to try to get across here. And I've got a couple of kind of 3 rules almost, right, if you want to call it that. And again, these aren't rules I have written on my on my wall or anything. I actually wrote these down. I sort of constructed these as part of my prep for this episode. So these aren't sort of something I follow religiously or anything like that, but these are kind of things that I understand inherently about a game that I'm always doing that I never really vocalized or wrote down or took stock of until I really was doing this episode. It took me a little bit of time to kind of go through this, but hopefully this way of breaking this down helps people to understand and maybe advance their game, because these aren't just things that matter against Brandenburg-Prussia. Clearly they aren't, right? These are core fundamentals of the game, and understanding more about how to optimize your actions and improve your action economy will matter into every single adversary. Absolutely true. And usually a sort of a simple rule of thumb would be, you've heard me talk a bit about kind of high level games and 6-6 games and those real extreme difficulty games. Those games can only really be won by really highly optimizing your actions is one thing, like really eking every single bit out of every single action. And also then there's a huge amount of luck and there's also a huge amount of major power lottery involved in that as well. So again, I'll put that to bed now, but just mentioning that kind of thing of really finding a way to get every single thing together into this one outcome, whether it's a major power like cast down the briny deep or something else, but really finding a way to kind of make all of that matter. So we'll break it down and we'll talk about what those 3 things look like here. So I tried to list them out in a mapping, in a sense, right? So I've got 3 kind of what I call objective truths written down here, which aren't really opinions of mine. I would say these are quite objective. They're just truths about the game. And I've kind of mapped them down to these 3 rules that I talked about, which are 3 core facets, really. They're simple stuff, in a sense, right? But you really need to think about this. So let's go through them one by one. Up first is, invader actions may be addressed by different spirit actions. And I've written in brackets, with varying degrees of success, which is important. So think about this. What does that look like? Well, okay, maybe I push a town out of a land versus maybe I destroy the town or deal 2 damage to it, right? Maybe I prevent and explore versus prevent a build. So in this case, maybe a wilds token removes the explorer and it never builds. That's fine. Or maybe the explorer gets in there and I push it out and I stop the build that way. They achieve the same thing, but they're different actions. Maybe I skip a ravage versus maybe I defend the ravage. They both stop the blight coming in, but they do it in different ways. And obviously, if I've defended the land with the hand in it, they counterattack. So you get the idea here. But again, here what I'm saying is you can achieve sort of very similar outcomes a lot of the time, but do it in different ways. And those invader actions being addressed by different spirit actions, for me, maps to a very basic rule is you need to search for optimization when you're looking for matching one action to another action. This comes up a lot when you hear people talk about island tiles and which tile they go on, right? So when you're new to the game, very often you'll go, right, this is my tile, that's your tile, that's your tile. We'll stay on our tiles and our island boards and we won't really move across and this is fine. I'll deal with my land, you deal with yours and so on. That is not the way to optimize in this game. And I don't really like, usually in Spirit Island, talking too much in sort of very concrete terms. It is a very variable game, and there's lots of different approaches to things. But this is one of those things that I'm absolutely flat out certain about. If you want to optimize your game and play at the highest level, you can't stay in your own island tile. That just doesn't exist. You have to find ways to optimize your actions and make each one of your actions that you're doing. If I've got to defend a 5, right? This is just one example, and it'll give you hopefully make the point for you here. If I've got to defend a 5 and I'm on my own island tile and maybe only one land is ravaging, but it's only ravaging for 3. If I use the defend a 5 in there, it works, but that is not optimized. I can probably find another land on this board right now that's ravaging for more than 3. Maybe it's ravaging for 6, and I can go and put my defend a 5 in that land. And that is a better use of that card because it's matched better to the action. So you're matching your invader action with a spirit action as best as you can. So you're searching for optimization there. So that's the first thing. That's our first rule, should I say. Second objective truth is the usage of a specific action may impact action economy in different ways in different circumstances. So again, here now we're talking about specific actions. In rule 1, we're talking about sort of the collection of actions. Now we're talking about a specific action. And even we can make this simpler. We could even talk about a specific card, right? Rather than an action. Well, let's take for argument's sake a card to make this point more clearly here. So the usage of a specific card may impact action economy in different ways in different circumstances. So one way that this might matter is different spirits use cards in different ways, obviously. So, my defend a 5, let's take for argument's sake the domesticated animals go berserk. I just talked about a defend a 5, there's one example of it. The element alignment is going to be different. Some spirits are going to like that more than others. So I think shadows will absolutely love that card because it's got a moon and a fire on it. Whereas a spirit like river will be slightly less inclined to play that card. They also won't defend cards, but you get the point, right? They're not well element aligned. Maybe, for example, a spirit has reclaim 1 and they're constantly reclaiming cards. So they're going to want a particular type of card, and maybe a card suits them better than it suits others because maybe it's free or whatever, right? Other things like maybe, for example, you have supplemental effects in your kit. So again, take a defend card for argument's sake. Now, defend is probably not the best example because almost everybody wants defend. But if you're a spirit that has a lot of the hand movement, like BlunderSpeaker, you really want another defend card probably on top of the one you already have, to really take advantage of you moving the hand around. So a defend card works much better for you than perhaps a card or a spirit like Eyes Watch from the Trees. They have so much defense already in their kit that maybe they don't want another defend card, just for argument's sake. So again, the same card, different spirits usage. Again, this isn't groundbreaking stuff. I'm sure everybody knows this already, but we're just trying to make the point here. But another way is, for example, different game context, where a card, the exact same card, even on the exact same spirit. Now, let's not even talk about different spirits. Let's take the same spirit. They could use the card, on 2 different turns in different ways, and it would have a different impact on the action economy, even maybe 3 turns after they played it the first time. So some examples here might be things like if you isolate a land and you miss versus you hit. I take a chance, it's a 50-50, whatever, I isolate the land, it didn't come up, okay, it was a wasted effect, right? So that the change in action economy from if that hits versus not is different. Same thing as, for example, if I'm if I'm lightning and I've got like my innate that's destroying a town, I don't have a good land for it. I'm just going to hit that town over there because I've no better choice. A better example for this might be ocean. Sometimes ocean will just drown a random town on its coastal land because it's got nobody else to drown, right? Sometimes it'll be in the wrong land at the wrong time. If you're me, this happens with ocean all the time, where you don't quite time your tide quite correctly, and you end up in a land and you drown a town just because it's there. It gives you an energy, yes, that's fine, but if that happened to be a land that was just about to ravage and you got there in time and you destroyed the land, that's significantly better action economy than the exact same thing on 2 turns later that's at the wrong time versus the invader sort of cadence. So this is our second rule. Be aware of the context. That's it. First thing we talked about was search for optimization. Second thing we're talking about is be aware of the context. The same thing might not apply the same way on a given turn or a given spirit or anything else. Okay, third and last objective truth. First of all, hopefully you've agreed with me at least so far in terms of the objective truths. Whether or not you agree with me on the rules is probably a little bit up to yourself here, but I'm hoping that the objective rules at least land. So the third thing here is spirit actions have varying levels of investment an outcome. What do I mean by that? Every action that you take, we talked about this kind of give and take, push and pull, all that kind of stuff, right? You have to invest in some way or another to make everything happen in this game. So, you know, your kind of growth economy and how you manage all of that with managing your top track versus your bottom track, you know, whether I take a particular action to give me an extra card play this turn, whether I, you know, save up energy across 3 turns because I drew cast down in the briny deep, but I can't afford it, so I need to take like 3 turns where I'm sort of maybe underplaying or whatever. So all of these kind of things in terms of saving up and aiming towards, that's one way. Maybe comboing a card with other cards. So we talked before about the hand and defend, right? You know, if I'm ThunderSpeaker and I've got lots of the hand movement, a defend is kind of just it's natural. It just sort of slots in with what I'm doing already. But if I'm a spirit that has no hand movement at all and I find a defend power, the context is different, right? So it's kind of there's a different level of investment there. If I take that defend power, I may now need to dedicate another action to going and finding a hand movement card to pair with that. That's another sort of thing where an investment is needed. You know, building up towards your top level of your innate. You know, if you're shadows, for example, you don't have a top level of your innate, right? It's this thing that sits there that promises all kinds of glory, and you just never hit it because it's non-existent. So, you know, that's another way where you're sitting and looking at an investment that just sort of never seems to sort of come to fruition. You know, major thresholds is clearly another example we talked about cast down there. So, you know, again, there's lots of different ways here in this game. Again, I've just given some examples, but there's a whole bunch more of how you have to invest towards an outcome. The simplest level of investment comes from your basics of, I gain 2 energy this turn, I've got 2 card plays, I'll play 2 cards in my hand, there they are, I pay 2 energy, and you kind of just, that's your standard gameplay. It still requires investment. Everything you do requires investment. Even the simplest things of just, I'll just spike my energy +3, that gives me enough to play my 3 cards. Well, the investment there was you traded off some of your long-term progression to play those 2 cards now. You could have taken your other growth action, which gave you an extra card, and maybe you invested by not playing one of those cards in your hand that you now can't afford, and instead of playing maybe your major power, you play your minor power because you gained a card. So all of these little things, there's always little trade-offs and always little investments happening all throughout the game, all from the very start of the game all the way up. Lightning is another example. Lightning takes a turn off a lot as part of its quote-unquote solved build. It'll do a kind of a underplay on nothing on the first turn, and that is an investment into a build that goes 2, 3, 4 turns into the game of going into that kind of reclaim stuff. And again, it's an investment on the first turn. So again, hopefully that's kind of well understood and the point is made there. But what I would like to make as a rule, and for me, it's the most important of the 3 rules. This is the crux of action economy. It comes down to find ways, as part of what we just talked about there with investments and outcomes and balancing, and whether it's in 1 turn or 5 turns, you should always be looking for ways to get an X for 1 rather than a 1 for X. Now, what does this mean? This is where we're starting to get into those maths equations I promised you that we wouldn't get into, but bear with me here. It's hopefully simple enough. If you take, what I like to use as a rule of thumb is I would like to solve every invader action with 1 spirit action. It's a very baseline rule. There's no maths behind it. I haven't researched it. I'm sure the dev team and Ted and Eric and everybody else have all sorts of equations behind the scenes that are far more sort of robust than this. But for me, a very baseline rule of thumb is if I take 1 action to solve 1 invader action, that's usually pretty good news. All the way back in episode 1, we talked a little bit about the problems that Earth and Shadows have, where they have these 2 card combos, but they're 2 cards that combine to solve a single land. That's a 1 for 2. Essentially, a 1 solve for 2 cards. Bad news. You want to be avoiding that at all costs. What you want to solve is a 1 land for 1 action, not a 1 land for 2 actions. But ideally, what you're looking for is X for 1, meaning solving multiple invader actions for one of my actions. And that's the sweet spot. If you can find them, you're absolutely singing. And we're going to talk about some examples of what that looks like. But just that's the kind of line. If we're looking at that kind of almost across the thing here, draw yourself a little horizontal line. For those not watching me, I'm doing this kind of awkward line drawing here across the screen. But if you think about that as your kind of 1-to-1 ratio almost that's going across, and as you're going throughout the game, every single time you take a 1 for 2, where you use 2 actions to solve a land, you're dipping below that line, and you're now running in this kind of below par or off balance kind of thing, where the invaders are getting ahead of you on actions because you're using multiple actions for every one that they have. If you can get yourself above that line, again, you're now reversing the dynamic, and you're going in a much more steady progression, and you will win that game. If you're taking these kind of X for 1, 2 for 1, 3 for 1 type actions, you'll beat any adversary at level 6, because that's just way too much for them to handle. And the final note here is this kind of idea of balance and progression across the game. Clearly, it's not linear, right? I drew a line and I kind of draw it like this across, but usually if you're familiar with the game, you'll know that there's more of a bell curve in how the game actually progresses. So usually the game will look like this is the first couple turns, invaders come out fast, especially if they're BP, they're coming out extremely fast, and they hit you really early, and usually you'll feel overwhelmed. That's very natural for this game, right? Where the invaders are taking more actions than you at the start of the game. You can't really afford to even just take a standard regular turn 1. Or turn 2 is better, right? So on turn 2 on a regular game, what have they done? They've built in 2 lands, 1 terrain, 2 lands. So they're now about to ravage on you in 2 lands, and they're also about to build in another 2 lands. So they're kind of taking 4 relevant actions this turn, if we ignore their explore for a moment. They're taking 4 actions which you'd like to solve. You usually won't have 4 actions on the second turn of the game to solve. You'll usually maybe have 2, max 3. If you hit your 8, sometimes you'll hit 3, and that's pretty good even still. So again, how you balance those early turns where you're behind tempo, which that tempo word is coming back in here a little bit, where they're getting more actions on you early in the game. Then you're progressing to a mid-game where you usually turn the corner at some point, usually around maybe turn 5, maybe turn 6. You will progress to the point where you get ahead of them. And now you start taking more actions than they do, and you start to get ahead of them and get control of them, which is usually around about a turn or 2 before the stage 3 card hits. And then again, you kind of usually have a bell curve where you start behind, then you get ahead, and then oftentimes the stage 3 card will kind of come back and it'll hit you again, and you'll kind of go on this downside of the bell curve, and then usually you'll win the game before too long. Oftentimes against a lot of adversaries, if you go 3, 4, 5 stage 3 cards deep, they're taking a lot of actions on you, and it can be really hard to get over the line if you're not sort of rushing the fear. Usually it can be too hard to control the board, at least at that point. So anyway, again, my point here is to say that in that progression curve, so it's not a straight line across where you're on this kind of 1-to-1 ratio. Your ratio will actually look more like you're below the 1 for the first few turns, then you kind of go ahead of the 1, and then you go below the 1 again. So when you're looking at this kind of 2 for 1 or 1 for 2 sort of relationship I talked about before, think of it more like an average. And the most important thing that you can absolutely do is throw every single number and equation I just said out the window, because this isn't science, this isn't maths, it's not anything at all. This is intuition, right? And that's all I'm trying to get the point across here, is that, look, if a perfect algorithm exists, which I'm sure it doesn't, and I certainly don't have one, maybe the developers do, but I certainly don't, but even if a perfect algorithm existed, nobody would want it, nobody would use it, nobody would care about it. The people playing the game, me, you, the fans, all of that, we don't want algorithms. We just want sort of gameplay patterns, and we want to enjoy ourselves, and we want to enjoy the lore and the theme, and you definitely don't want to enjoy me sitting here telling you about 1 for 2s and 2 for 1. So look, that's the last thing I'm going to say now, but just do keep in mind that multiple actions for 1 is what we're talking about here. So okay, I'm going to stop all of that kind of mathsy lecture type stuff. What are we now? We're 142. We're going pretty well. we're now going to talk about just some cards. I've got some cards on the table in front of me here, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about some spirits as well. Not going to take too long on this because we do have, of course, the game, where I want to talk a little bit about sort of how Brett and Volcano went in their game. So I'll just take a little bit of time to go through some of these cards here. I've basically gone through the kind of minor powers in the deck and pulled out pretty much every, at least on the table in front of me here, every minor power that does this kind of it's good on action economy for one reason or another here, right? Usually it's like I can do something that very often it takes 2 actions to achieve, or in some cases here we've got some cards that can maybe solve 2 lands at once, which is really strong, and it doesn't come up all that much. So we'll go through. I've got 6 kind of categories here, and I'll talk about 1 or 2 cards in each category. So we're going to start off and we're going to talk about what I call the opportunity cost. So these are kind of from worst to best a little bit. So we're going to talk about the opportunity cost category. And what this means, this is another kind of term in kind of game design and theory, which I'm not going to get into today, but suffice to say, opportunity cost means you're paying a cost that is costing you other opportunities. So essentially, if I take a decision, what are the alternatives that I've given up on? So in this case, these 3 cards I have in my hand here are technically good action economy if you can make them work, but they're not very good cards. And if you pick one of these, you're costing yourself the opportunity at any of the other 3 cards in your draft. So generally speaking, I would not really recommend these cards. They'll have their moments, I'm sure, but I'm not sure I've ever used any of the 3. We're talking about here Sky's Herald, the Season of Return, Like Calls to Like, and Renewing Boon. So I think probably of the 3, maybe Like Calls to Like is the one. I actually drafted this in that teaching game I talked to you about the other day, and I got to use it to gather a single explorer. But technically here you could in theory use this a little bit like Lure of the Deep Wilderness has a card called Softly Beckoning Ever Inward, which is super strong, one of the best uniques in the game. And they can use that to gather explorers and towns from multiple lands into one land. So they can solve like 2, maybe even 3 lands with that card. It's amazing. This is kind of like a very light version of that, where if target land has an explorer, you can gather an explorer similarly for towns. So in theory, you could solve multiple lands for this, but to be honest, it's not a great card, and neither are any of those. So we'll move quickly on from them. The next of the categories then I talk about is the Isolate category. So this is where they've kind of tacked Isolate onto a couple of cards, which is, sometimes a very powerful effect. But like I said before, I think in one of the examples a few minutes ago, sometimes you just isolate land and it just doesn't click. So it's a kind of a one-shot thing. You're very often guessing where you're going. The best you'll usually get is a 50-50. But, again, we've got some cards here like Roiling Bog and Snagging Thorn, Mesmerize Tranquility, Entrap the Forces of Corruption, and Set them on an Ever-Twisting Trail. So these are all various versions of cards that isolate a land, and sometimes you'll get to kind of solve 2 lands, or at least solve 2 actions. So one example, I think I brought this up on a previous episode. So Set them on an Ever-Twisting Trail is gather or push 1 explorer and then isolate target land. So I think what did we say? We said against Sweden, wasn't it? Where you might gather an explorer into a land from one land that's adjacent. So you do that to stop a build. So there's 1 action solved with 1 card. That's a 1-to-1. But then you get to isolate the land that you just gathered into. And sometimes that might matter, because if you just isolated a ravaging land that you gathered your explorer into, then you got to shut off the Sweden 5 ability, and you then wouldn't have to do the mining rush into an adjacent land because it's isolated. So there you got a kind of a 2-for-1, and you got to solve 2 actions of the invader. So these are cards where sometimes the isolate will work against like an adversary rule, such as Sweden 5, and there's plenty of others that have them. And then other times you'll maybe just randomly, Mesmerize Tranquility is one here. Isolate target land. This is a reasonable card here. It's pretty decent, and it can certainly come up where you go isolate the land, and then each invader deals -1 damage. So it's like a pseudo defend. If you've got an explorer in the town or the land, you hit that, you go minus thing, you kind of solve the ravage. But then if you hit maybe back to back and they're about to explore into the land, then they don't. So you've kind of got a little bit of that going on. So again, not the strongest in terms of action economy in here, but certainly some cards that can pick up 2 actions for 1. So the next one then is, I call the leave something behind category here. And a lot of these cards here, I think maybe all of them do kind of 2 small solves in 1 land. I think they're mostly related to wilds tokens. So a little bit similar to isolate before, but now they're leaving something behind. So it's guaranteed to pick off the prevention of the explorer instead of only working this turn. So what do we have in here? We've got things like razor sharp undergrowth. We've got disorienting landscape, which both do that. We've got renewing boon, which is a remove a blight, and then if you've got the threshold, you get to add a wilds token. That card is terrible. Again, it's not one I'd ever really advocate for using, so I'm not saying in here just because it has good action economy doesn't necessarily mean it's a great option. To be honest with you, that one probably should have belonged in the opportunity cost category. So again, but here you can see there's a couple of other examples like scream disease into the wind. I put this one in here because it's a leave something behind type card. It gives a spirit +1 range. So sometimes +1 range will be worth an action. In that case, changing the range of a card can sometimes mean it works versus it doesn't. So it's very hard to call this necessarily solving an action on its own, but it can be the difference between yes versus no, win versus lose sometimes. So it can come up, but of course it leaves a disease behind. And probably my favorite of this category is dire metamorphosis here. Again, similar to one of the previous episodes we talked about. I had no clue where to put dire metamorphosis when I was categorizing it in a previous episode. And here it's a little bit tricky as well because it can do a whole bunch of different stuff. It could maybe pick off an explorer to stop it building, and then that stops the build. But now you're also adding in a disease, which prevents an additional build down the line, but you're also adding a wild, so that prevents an additional explorer down the line. So sometimes dire metamorphosis can have these weird solves 2 or 3 actions or whatever. But again, it's in this category. It's a do something and then leave something behind category. So that's category 3. Category 4 then. We're starting to get into some pretty decent stuff here. This is the 2 actions in 1 category. So it's not necessarily solving 2 invader actions in 1 land, but rather this is a card which does something that often takes an invader 2 actions to do. So it's 2 invader actions put into 1, and oftentimes this will be like a medium solve in 1 land as opposed to 2 small solves. So what are the cards we have in here? We have Call of the Hand Ways, which can be quite nice, especially if you get your threshold to convert the town into a Dahan. We have strong and constant currents here, so that can again solve push a town out of a ravaging land. It solves quote unquote medium land, but you can also then potentially with the threshold move your Dahan into another land and set up a defend. So that's kind of 2 actions in 1. Promises of protection then. I think I mentioned this on the previous episode. I love this card. Gather up to 2 Dahan, and then you give the Dahan +2 health while they're in the land. So that's your pseudo defend. I think I called it last time. So not only do you get to kind of defend, you don't defend the land because obviously you take blight, but you get to pull in your Dahan and you let them counterattack against small ravages. So it's a kind of a building kill in a kind of a workaround type of a way. So not the strongest 2 for 1, but again it achieves 2 things. It moves Dahan in there and it allows Dahan to attack back. And a slightly better version of that then would be Call to Guard. So Call to Guard in this case can pull the hand into a land and it can give defend as opposed to additional health. So pretty strong one there. And that's your kind of 2 actions in 1 category. Next category, then we are going, and we're really starting to ramp it up here in terms of effectiveness, and this is called the solve multiple lands categories. I alluded to this at the start, and this is where we're really getting into the meat and potatoes of action economy here. Not every single card I'm about to mention here is exactly very strong, but it is certainly situationally strong. If you find the right moment to play these cards, it can be super, super good, because minor powers don't really do the things that these cards achieve. So what do we have? We have Call to Trade, one of the best cards in the deck by far, easily, and we talked about it being the single best card in the whole deck against Sweden. So it lets you move the hand, although that's not really the most important part of this card. It lets you stop a Ravage, and it also lets you pull a town from an adjacent land, which is potentially stopping a build or another Ravage in another land as well. So that is a card where you can fairly safely stop 2 invader actions with one card in 2 different lands, which is really good. Gold's Allure is sort of, somewhat similar that we talked about earlier in terms of gathering stuff from multiple lands. So Gold's Allure lets you gather a little bit like the Softly Beckon card from Lure, lets you gather from 2 different lands, which can, if timed correctly, can maybe stop a build and also stop a Ravage. Encompassing Ward. It's a solid but unspectacular card. It gives you defend 2 in every land where target spirit has a presence. So it requires a bit of setup, and it's not the most powerful card, but I have seen this do work. I've done work with this card. If you can set up 2 or 3 lands, where you sort of know a turn or 2 in advance, you can set this up where you can go and solve 3 lands with this card, which is obviously really, really strong for a minor power. A similar type of one is Entrancing Apparitions. To Gold's Allure. It's similar to Gold's Allure, where you have a defend 2 in a land, and if the land is empty, you can gather up to 2 explorers from adjacent lands. So again, similar sort of thing to the Softly Beckon card, where you're pulling invaders, you're gathering invaders from a couple of adjacent lands. In theory, if you get it right, you stop 2 builds with that card, and if you get it absolutely right, you pull them into a ravaging land that contains a Dahan, and then you defend 2 in the land, and you also get to kill the 2 explorers, which is really pipe dream stuff, but it's certainly possible. The last of these cards then is probably the worst of them, which is Sunset's Fire, flows across the land. Not a great card, but it does allow you to deal 1 damage and pay an additional energy to deal 1 damage in an adjacent land. So again, if timed correctly, you can solve two lands with that. Finally, then the last category of the 6 minors is going to be our support cards. And these have varying flavors of action economy built into these, but some of them are worth talking about. So we'll start with Elemental Boon. I don't like this card very much. It's one of the worst support cards in my mind. It's very situational. I'm not saying it never comes up. It does definitely come up, and it has its moments. If you can Elemental Boon at the right time on a spirit, and both of you gain if you get 3 elements on one and 2 elements for the other spirit, if you can take 5 of the 6 elements, it's pretty good. If you get all 6, it's great, and I have had that come up once or twice where you get all 6, and it's really, really nice in that spot. But a lot of the time it's I'll give you 2 elements and I'll maybe take 1 or 2 or something, and it's just not worth it in that spot. But again, if timed right, you can level up your innate, level up their innate, or give them a threshold or something, and then it can be really worth the 1 action that you spend on it. After that, then we've got 2 kind of slightly oddball, maybe don't quite fit in here, but they do in some ways. You've got Spur On with Words of Fire, and this in some ways is almost anti-synergy, because you have Spur On with Words of Fire, which is taking an action to give another action to somebody else. And in some cases, if you're playing this true solo, you're spending an action to give yourself 1 action back, which is almost a total waste altogether. But if you get this and combo it with the right other cards and situations, this can be one of the strongest cards in the minor power deck, and I absolutely love this card. It's so nice. If you can combo this with energy gaining cards, so something like Gift of Living Energy plus this, you get to play it, give the other person the ability to play an extra card this turn, then give them loads of energy, and then they go ahead and play a major out of their hand or something. So this is where I talked about before, this idea of investment versus outcome really starts to come into play, because here we're investing actions. In that circumstance I'm talking about there, I'm like investing 2-3 actions for maybe one big outcome, like a big thresholded major or something like that. And in that kind of case, it can be well worth investing multiple actions, like 2, 3, 4 actions, to make one particular maybe card work, or maybe one, I don't know, like a snake quake, or, you know, these really big splashy sort of really powerful effects. And if that really big powerful effect makes up for the lost actions, well, it was well worth it. And there's another card right beside it that I'll talk about in the exact same vein. It's Sky Stretches to Shore, exact same kind of thing, where you take a big splashy major, big slow power, really powerful thing, and you make it fast, and it's well worth the lost action on this, because ultimately Sky Stretches to Shore doesn't solve any land. It's not doing anything to a land on the board, but if you make a cast down into the briny deep fast, you can wipe out a whole board fast, and it gets you back everything you invested plus a whole ton more. So that's them 2 cards. Finally then, the actual best 2 cards in this whole category, and these are the very epitome of why Action Economy is so good, are 2 arguably of the best miners, 2 of the top 5 best miners in the whole deck probably. You've got Gift of Twin Days, which gives you, once this turn, target spirit can repeat the lowest costed power card they have in play by paying its cost again, and then you may do likewise. So 1 card lets me get 1 repeat on one of my cards, and 1 repeat on one of your cards, which is the very crux and the very basics of Action Economy. I spend 1 action and it got me 2 actions, which is just a fantastic conversion rate. It's that 2 for 1 I talked about before. Really strong card, and it epitomizes everything I've been talking about. And even better again, the actual best card in the whole minor power deck, Gift of Constancy. We probably all knew it was coming. You've probably all been thinking about it for the last 10 minutes that I've been talking, but here it is. What does the card do? It says target spirit gains 2 energy. There's 1 action. At the end of turn, target spirit may reclaim 1 power card instead of discarding it. There's another action. If you target another spirit, you may also reclaim 1 power card instead of discarding it. 3 actions. So I just got 3 things. 2 energy for another spirit, they get to reclaim a card, and you get to reclaim a card. 3 for 1, and that is as good as it gets in terms of almost anything you can do in this entire game. There is very little in this game that pound for pound does as much as that single card does. So that, hopefully, if nothing else, has kind of clarified what I've been talking about in terms of how do you find ways. And of course the card is free, which is just obnoxious as well. So super strong card. I've got 3 majors. Before I talk about the spirits, and I know we're getting on here, a little bit of a longer episode, even for me, but hopefully you're still with me here. But I've got 3 majors, which again, a little bit, I think I mentioned at least one of them already here, but they just reinforce a couple of the topics I've been talking about here, so I won't labor the point. Bargains of Power and Protection. Bargains of Power Protection is a card which you can get out early. You can invest 1 action on this early, and this can add so many actions and so much value for you over the whole game. You might get to defend 3, 4, 5, 6 times over a game when you play this for just a single investment of 1 action. Now I know again here there's also a balancing act. You're investing 1 action, but you're also investing -1 energy every turn. So this is where we talked about that sort of balancing act of how much you invest versus how much you get out. If I only do this once to defend 1 single land, actually that's probably not worth it, because I'm now losing an energy every turn, and that could cost me 2 plus 3 or 4 more throughout the whole game, and I now spend 6 energy to defend a single land. That's really poor. But this card isn't doing that, right? Let's be honest. You're never doing that with Bargains of Power and Protection, but you get the idea here. So it's all about a balancing act, and it's about balancing how much you put in versus how much you get out, and that generally gives you a lot more out than you have to put in. Next card is Power Storm. So a little bit similar to what we talked about with Gift of Twin Days, but this is a significantly better example. Is that you give people 3 energy now, as well as also giving them the chance to repeat a card. You also let them repeat any card. It's not just the lowest power cost they have in play. And oh, by the way, if you hit the threshold, you get to repeat up to 2 more power cards. You can repeat 3 power cards. So now for Power Storm, you're giving somebody 3 energy plus repeat 3 cards. That's 4 actions from one single card, which, needless to say, should not be surprising to anybody why that's rated in the top in the top 4 or maybe 5 major powers in the whole game. And finally, we already talked about it, I won't labour the point, Cast Down in the Briny Deep. It's the perfect example of how do you balance all of the incomes and how do you manage all of the investments and think about it, and it's spent over multiple turns and somebody finds it and then everybody goes, oh, okay, I've got Gift and Aegis Connection, yeah, no, I've got Elemental Boon, I'll give you that, I'll give you that, you do that, you put it all together, and you spend like your whole game building up to this card, and then you do it and you just wipe an island board, and it's like a million fear. You now, not only do you just kill all the invaders and stop every problem that was on that board, you also stop every problem that will ever happen again for the rest of the game, so it prevents all of those actions as well. So card is absurd. The difference between the the base level, which is just wipe one land, versus wipe every land on the board for the whole rest of the game is crazy. And clearly the developers have talked about how there's way too big a gap between those two things, but it's just a funny one to point out, and hopefully makes the point very strongly about everything we have said until this point. We're nearly there. Hoagie, I know you're laughing at me. We're not really there. We're kind of nearly there. We're getting there. I had a couple of spirits I wanted to talk about here, and I'm actually not really going to labour any of this because I put them in here in case I got to this point and I hadn't said enough in the episode, but clearly we've gone through a lot of the things. So I had a couple of spirits just put to the side here, and I'll just mention them very, very, very quickly. I'm not going to spend any amount of time at all, but I've put kind of 3 categories of spirits, all of which are interesting and powerful in certain ways in the space of action economy. First up is Keeper. It's Keeper the Forbidden Wilds here. Keeper is a raw stats demon. It's a powerhouse in terms of raw stats. It has growth options, it has growth tracks that are just absurd. Both of its growth options and its growth tracks and its kind of growth economy is all just way, way, way too powerful. I think everybody's aware of it. But the interesting thing about Keeper is its unique powers are absolutely pans. They're awful. Apart from one is really good. The one that gains a power is obviously excellent, but it's also the one that kind of does the least, right? It doesn't affect the board. It's just a power gain card. But the other 3 cards are terrible. If Keeper had good unique powers, it would be absurdly broken. We would be talking about Keeper all the time in that upper echelons of S tier, where Fractured and Stone and all them belong. The only reason Keeper doesn't belong there is because its uniques are terrible. But everything else, like its left innate is great. You can spread the left innate in multiple lands. It's got that kind of split mechanic where you can do it into 2 lands. Even its right innate, it pushes explorers out to solve a build, but it also leaves an isolate or a wild, should I say, behind. So it's got everything going for it in terms of action economy. And it's just that its unique powers are crap. That's the only kind of thing that's holding it back. But you've got a bunch of others in there. You've got things like Heart Vigil, Stone, even Breath, I think is really good into that kind of raw stats type of thing, because it can solve like 2, 3, even 4 lands with its left innate, so it can get a lot of work done there. So they're kind of raw stats. Next up, I kind of had something which is Shifting Memory of Ages. Now, most people probably will not consider Shifting Memory of Ages when they think about action economy. Why? Because its bottom track is awful. It's got a kind of a Bring Your Dreams and Nightmares type bottom track where it just goes 1, 2, 2, 2 with the asterisk 3. It just takes forever. And I never go on the bottom track of memory because it's just, for me, it's just not worth it. But there's some things interesting about memory I wanted to talk about here. It has a +9 button, which gives you +9 energy, but no presence placement. So again, when we're talking about action economy here, we're going spike energy, but spiking energy is an investment. I'm not growing. I'm not getting something from that except for energy. So you've got this kind of weird trade-off of when do I do that versus when do I do other things. And there's other things going on with memory where you do this kind of major power spam type build where you really just play like one major and one other card a turn. You've got like 2 card play for the whole game with most games of memory. But they've got a lot of other things in there that kind of offset that, which I thought were worth talking about. And I'll really quickly talk about them. Elemental Teachings is one of the best unique powers in this whole game, and I'll hear nothing said against it. I know Gift of Proliferation is the best, but honestly, Elemental Teachings is not as far away from Gift of Proliferation as most of you think. This card is insane. I absolutely love it. I absolutely love Memory, and this card is super broken. And the things you can do with this, I know I talked about Elemental Boon not being as you know, one of my favorite cards, but first of all, this is unique. That's in your hand every game. It's 0 instead of 1, and Shifting Memory has this kind of mechanic where it can save up the elements and it can kind of preempt them in advance, and it can give you exactly what you need. It can give you 3 of the same element if you wanted, so much stronger than Elemental Boon. This card is broken. It's also got this card that, like, it's got one of the best cards that I never play, if I can call it that, right? Study the Invader's Fears. 2 fear, turn the top card of the fear deck face over. And I love that ability. Bringer has this ability, and Memory has it on a card, and this is one of the most fun abilities to resolve in this whole game. But basically, for every player in the game, you now get the understanding of what's coming in the fear deck. So this is one of those mechanics where it kind of scales, and it's actually better with more players. So the action economy of this card goes up the more people there are around the table. So these are the types of things I'm talking about, where you need to look and search in a kit for something that's offering you more value than what it gives you on the face. Most people would look at Shifting Memory and say they've got terrible action economy, they've only got 2 cards, they only play 1 major plus 1 other card a turn. But the things you can achieve with the individual cards, like Teachings, the Invader's Fears one I just talked about, and so on, are crazy strong for how little, quote unquote, that they do in a game. And finally, then I said I wasn't going to take ages, and I took ages, which is you have to get used to me doing this at this point. But the very last one I wanted to talk about was Relentless Gaze of the Sun. And you know, so if Keeper was a kind of a raw stats merchant, and sort of, you know, Memory and others like maybe Fractured, for example, are more like the individual power of one ability or one card, and kind of how that ladders up to more actions. Sun is a kind of an unlocking, I called it here in my notes, where you have to kind of unlock the actions and bring them out and really sort of tease them out throughout a game where they're really not obvious on the surface. You don't have that obvious brute force type thing of Keeper or Stone, and you don't have the kind of make up for others kind of things that Keeper does. With Sun and some others like Serpent, Downpours, a couple of others I'd put in this category, you really need to tease it out. And Sun is the best example of this. I think this card is an absolute marvel of game design. I absolutely love Sun. I think it's wonderful design. I really still feel like I haven't quite pegged it. Like I've got some big wins. I think I beat a 6-6 with Sun, if I'm not mistaken. I can't remember which one it was, but I've got some big wins with. Oh yeah, I beat England and Sweden. The plus health plus damage combo of England Sweden I beat with Sun and Finder and Fractured. But so yeah, I've won at 6-6, and I still feel like I haven't quite gotten it. You know, and I think I played that whole game as a top track build. I've seen other games that I've played where I felt it was very much a bottom track spirit. So I think there's so much to tease out with Sun, and obviously its mechanics are built around kind of repeating into singular lands, which is in itself not very action efficient, right? You know, on the surface, Sun is quite has very poor action economy, because especially if you go top track, right? You've got like 1 card play. What are you doing with 1 card play, right? right? But then you start to tease it out, and you've got like the innates that do different things. You know, if you go the right track with the kind of multicolor kind of stuff on the right innate, you can start to give things out. You can do kind of support abilities. On the left innate, then you can kind of achieve a lot of that with just the elements that you have, so you don't necessarily have to unlock multiple card plays, and you can kind of get stuff done that way. So they've got a whole pot of stuff going on, and it's, I mean, I adore that spirit. I think it's super fun to play. I think it's a super unique puzzle. I think it's significantly more interesting than Downpour. They both kind of play in the same kind of repeat space, but Sun has a lot more limitations, and in some ways actually ends up being more powerful than Downpour, although Downpour is also broken. They're two extremely powerful spirits, and it's probably not surprising that the repeat mechanic is a very powerful thing you can do in Spirit Island. So that's that. That's all of that. I'm going to stop right now. I'm going to check my can of beer. Unfortunately, it's empty. So I'm going to go to my my rest of my bottle of sparkling water here to get me over the next handful of minutes. Insert narrator here with a handful of minutes. You mean 1 more hour? But no, it won't be 1 more hour. If you stuck on with me, we're 2 minutes 12 at the moment on my clock, so thank you for staying. That's the bulk of the kind of action economy stuff. The last thing I wanted to do, because we talked about it and we say at every episode we'll do a sort of a breakdown of the playthrough of Breath and Volcano into BP6. Now, as always, you don't need to have seen the game to follow along with what I'm saying here. That's a promise I make to you every time. I will always make this this segment of my show interesting for everybody who's listening, if you haven't seen my playthrough. So let's talk about what we saw in the game that was good action economy and what was bad action economy. So I've just remembered, I didn't do it last time, but I'm doing it now. I'm just about to go and link up here in the top corner over here somewhere. I will link the actual video. So please do, if you haven't seen it already and you kind of don't want to have a spoiler, go and watch the video and then come back to me in a couple of days where I'll be right here. So do go and check the thing out. But for everybody else who's listening and for everybody who's just returning after watching my magnificent playthrough, we're here now. I can give you the spoilers. I did win quite comfortably against BP6, which is great news, but there is some bad news as part of the good news. So there's an asterisk beside the win. So I made 2 howling cheating errors as part of the game, which I was not happy with when I watched it back and I noticed. So just for clarification here, I was using the Breath of Darkness right innate. I was using the level 1 to downgrade multiple invaders. I was treating it as downgrade all invaders in the land, which it most definitely cannot do. The level 2 of the innate can downgrade all invaders, but the level 1 cannot. The level 1 is only supposed to downgrade a single invader. So I did cheat. I think I did it at least twice. I might have even done it 3 times, but I did watch back through the playthrough, and it wouldn't have mattered is the long and the short of it. And by the time I was doing that, I already had my presence leapt over into the heart and the mouth of the volcano. So I had a presence from Breath in the volcano land. So pretty much any time anything was escaping, I was just dropping it into the volcano land. So clearly here over the course of the game, I should have allowed more pieces escape back in, because I was like downgrading like 3 explorers at a time, and I just killed them all. But obviously I shouldn't have been allowed to do that. But I watched it through, and essentially what would have happened is I would have just dropped multiple more invaders into the volcano. The mountain didn't come up for ages. There was like next to no mountain explorers in the whole game, so they would have just sat there in the volcano land. It wouldn't have made any difference in the game. And thankfully I can say that, you know, despite that hugely egregious cheat, it didn't really affect anything. So that was the first thing. The second thing was also an egregious cheat. I on the second to last turn of the game, and I hate myself for doing this because I talked before about writing a volcano guide and guiding other people how to play with volcano, and then I cheated and I used G2 on the second last turn. I used the growth 2 option to pull 2 presents off my track, and I played 2 cards in that turn. Now I hadn't unlocked the second card play yet. I was 1 short. of the second card play node. So I should not have been allowed to play 2 card plays that turn. Clearly that's a massive cheat. In this case, playing the 2 cards was important to my whole game, and it was very clearly important to my whole game. The G2 was not important to my whole game, so it's a very easy fix in that case. If I had noticed at the time, the fix would have been very simple. Instead of playing G2, I would have just played G3 instead, which would have given me that extra card play. Clearly that's kind of where the confusion was coming from. I had been playing the whole game with G3 and using the extra card play that way. So if I just swapped it and I just went G3 that turn, the only difference is I put 1 less presence into the land. I actually end up with more energy if I do it that way. I have enough card plays to do it. The sacred sites and all the rest of it would just work out fine. It was very slightly different, the order of operations with how I managed the turn. With I think on the breath side, I did the ability that lets you kind of abduct one of Volcano's presence. It would have been slightly different. The order of operations just would have went in a different order. But again, long story short is it would have worked and I would have been fine. So I'm really annoyed with myself because it kind of slightly tainted the game. But the end result is the game wouldn't have actually changed. The outcome would have been the same, and I did end up winning comfortably. So that's all of that. That's 10 minutes to explain all my mistakes. I wish I didn't have to waste 10 minutes doing it. And for those of you who are still with me, thank you again for staying. But now we're actually going to go. And we're actually going to talk about the good card economy stuff that we talked and the action economy stuff. So I'm going to go through these quite quickly here. We are close to the end of the episode. So what does it look like for Volcano then? Some of the stuff that they got to do in the game and sort of showcase where action economy shines from their side. First thing we talked about at the very start of the game. Now this didn't actually happen, but I talked about how important it can be if you hit a stage 3 card that contains a mountain at the start of the game with Volcano. The game is almost over. And I'm going to reiterate that now, even though it didn't happen in the game and I didn't hit a mountain for ages in the game. If you're playing against Brandenburg-Prussia as Volcano and you hit a mountain as in your stage 3 card, so you have a 50-50 shot, half of them contain mountains. If you hit one, the game is practically over. That is how broken Volcano is into Brandenburg-Prussia. That is how powerful matching their early action economy is. Because with Volcano, if it hits mountain, you get to solve essentially, on most board configurations, you get to solve 3 of their first ravages practically for free. You almost don't even have to think about it. It's so easy. You just solve 3 of their actions and they never recover. It's just that simple. So the game is almost over on the spot. So it's so broken, it's so powerful, but thankfully for the playthrough, it didn't happen. So that's one thing. Second thing is then we talked a little bit about sort of the exaltation of molten stone generating energy as well as going down the top track. So I was thankful I was able to show the top track build on the thing, but using those to kind of convert them then and convert your extra energy into card drafts is a good way to generate action economy for Volcano. And you saw in the playthrough how I was kind of churning through the decks, and I searched for a bunch of majors and stuff like that. So that's kind of a way to enable that style of play. Now, next thing then is the opening combo. I'll call it here, which is what I showed on the thing, and I do this all the time with Volcano. So you open on turn 1 with Rain of Ash. So you G2 top and bottom to enable the Rain of Ash, and you play that, and that's one of your solves. Like I talked about with the kind of, if your stage 3 card contains mountain, you do this and then one of your lands gets solved with Rain of Ash. Doesn't matter which one, right? And then you do on turn 2, then you go Lava Flows to get your bad lands into the particular land. So sorry, the Rain of Ash, you push everything into a land that's just about to build, so you create this kind of big build up land, and then you Lava Flows in there and you put a bad lands in there, and then on the following turn then, before that big land ravages, you go Pyroclastic Bombardment into the land, which is your kind of deal 1 damage to each building, plus some extra damage, of course, because of your badlands and things like that. And then you also erupt into the land. So this kind of combo, it's like a kind of a 3-turn combo, essentially. I do this all the time as Volcano. And what it essentially does is it optimizes each of your cards with each other. It kind of combos each of the cards together, and you just gain those little slight edges and benefits. So what we're not doing here is some of the stuff I talked about earlier in the episode, which is get a 2-for-1 or something like that, right? You're not 2-for-1ing with all of your cards, but you're like 1.1-for-1ing or whatever, right? 1.2. You're giving yourself those edges, and that's the other thing then to reinforce here as part of this is, when I Rain of Ash, I'm not just pushing two invaders off to a random land and leaving them there for later. I'm pushing them into the land that I'm thinking already preemptively about erupting the following turn. So I'm kind of creating a big zone that I'm going to wipe out a bunch of invaders. And you just, like, when you do it, you like clear half of your board, especially in the right kind of sequence of invader cards. If mountains is part of the invader cards that are coming up, you're clearing out your volcano land, you're clearing out the adjacent land that's building, you're potentially clearing out the other one that you Rain of Ashed away. Like, it's just, you get rid of so many invaders doing this, and it's like how to optimize usually the best way for each of those cards. So that's that. And what else do we have then? We had a careful management of fear as part of this game. So this is a sort of a straightforward thing. Most people will be familiar with it, but I think the really nice thing that Volcano allows you to do is it gives you that fast eruption possibility. And you saw there was one turn in the game where I got to essentially level 3 of my cards, my fear cards. So I had 2 stage 1 fear cards, and I was 2 fear shy of the next level, and I got the 2 fear, and I could level from 2 stage 1 cards up into 3 stage 2 cards. So that jump, that level up there, being able to carefully manage that, if you can get that right, that's a huge benefit to your action economy, sometimes from the smallest thing. So whether it's Breath of Darkness, they were part of that because they have a card that does 2 fear in the fast. So at some stage I was very carefully managing when that was happening. And then obviously on Volcano's side, sometimes they're going to get to do their sort of level 3, or not level 3, I think it's level 2 of their eruption, where they sacrifice 4 presence, generate 4 fear, and deal a bunch of damage in 2 lands. Like, they can really control when and how they gain fear. And if you get the right spot for it, you can upgrade maybe 1, maybe 2, maybe 3 of your fear cards, which is a huge boost to your action economy, because of course stage 3 cards are stage 2 cards are significantly better than stage 1. So okay, another thing here, using Volcano to solve the Prussia escalation. Prussia didn't have an escalation against Volcano, at least for the most part. In this game, funny enough, they did a couple of times, but only because I flipped the Blight card, and the Blight card was the one that adds a city and a town into your land, so they were already in the Volcano, so that kind of blocked the escalation a bit. But you get the idea here, when you've got that negative effect that makes you put something in a land, if you have somewhere really beneficial to put it, that kind of solves that action. So that is a boost to your action economy. What else did we have here? We're creating a pocket at some point. Some part of the game, we were doing the pocket sort of stuff, and we were erupting a little bit inefficiently with Volcano. So there was a turn where I kind of almost wasted a little bit one of my eruptions, but I used it to clear out a little pocket on the inland, and that got me a free action off my one of my explorers. So it's a +1 action. So you're kind of down and a little bit negative on what you invest, but it gives you a +1 on the other side, which stops a build on a ravage. So again, it's about managing that careful management of when do I decide to sacrifice those couple of presents, and when do I decide to hold on to them. Other than that, then on the breadth side of things, so that was kind of Volcano, which, despite it not being a hugely impressive Volcano game, they kind of dirtled around a little bit, like I used that term last time, but they got some good work done, and clearly there were good spots where they got a lot of very efficient action economy done. And on the side of breadth, then they had things like obviously careful management of where they were kind of jumping and pinging off explorers and solving lands that way. The reach from the infinite darkness there was a super cool moment at the end of the game where I got to give the bonus of the reach to Volcano in one turn, but then I got to jump Volcano when I was taking them out of the infinite darkness. I got to teleport them across the whole map, which was that last big flurry to win the game. Volcano was able to jump into a different land, G2, add 2 more presents, and then I got to sacrifice 3 of them to kill the city in the land and then kill a city next door, which was the way I won the game. It was a super cool ending, despite it being a bit of a kind of a dirty game and some kind of mistakes and stuff like that. The ending was super cool. So even if you're not going to watch the whole game, do go and check that one out. The ending is really cool. But otherwise, then what else? You got to, for example, as Breath, I got to put my presence in the volcano land. So again, benefits to their action economy. They got to bring the escaping invaders, and I just got to keep dumping them in the volcano, which is a sort of a benefit. Whereas otherwise, they'd usually go on your island tile, and you'd have to deal with them eventually. And the very last thing that Breath did, and last by no means least, was they got to draft Utter Accursed Dread and Bone, which was really cool, and I was really, really happy with that. So if you know me, I love my majors, and I love my showcasing some lower value majors, or at least lower tier majors that other people maybe don't consider. So I got to get that one on, and I got to threshold it twice, and that did some pretty nice work into multiple lands. So there were a couple of other moments where there was some kind of bad economy, just very, very quickly here at the very end. I wasted 2 major drafts with Volcano, which is horrible. I definitely don't recommend doing this. I drafted 2 majors into my hand and then ended up throwing them away before I ever even played them. So there was this kind of scramble where I was dig, and then eventually, of course, I found Paralyzing Fright, and it didn't matter at all because that card is absolutely insane for fear, and that got me towards the end game. There was a moment where I did Terror of the Hunted from Breath, which is the card that places like Explore or Strife onto multiple invaders, but there was like nowhere on the board to hit, so I ended up just strifing a bunch of useless explorers in the Infinite Dark, so that was kind of wasted. And there was a period of time where I was playing Swallowed by the Endless Dark, which is that card you're unique with a really powerful threshold effect, and I was just having to throw it away without the threshold because I was going top track and I was trying to unlock the flip the Incarnate thing, which I never did until the last turn, and I never got to use it, which I was kind of annoyed about. But alas, that is where we are. So that's it. That's the whole thing. That was my game. I really enjoyed it, and I really was really happy I got to get those 2 spirits up, who are 2 of my favorite spirits in the game. But that's it for Brandenburg-Prussia. 2 hours, 28 minutes and 12 seconds of it that you got to hear. Really appreciate you sticking with me. Let's just stick around for another just very few short minutes while I talk about what's coming up next. So that was Brandenburg-Prussia. They were 3rd from bottom, 4th from bottom. Then for me, in the last, in the highest place of the bottom group, so the bottom 4 group, and for me, the last one is going to be Scotland. So Scotland for me, they also match Brandenburg-Prussia in terms of being a 9.5 difficulty. I think there's a no-brainer in terms of who the 4 hardest adversaries are, and we're not talking about those today, so I'll ignore them, but there's 4 at the top, and then they're in, for me, very fixed place. I don't think there's any discussion around the order. I think they go from 1 to 4, and that's it. But in the bottom, clearly here, these could go in almost any order. I had 2 of them at level 9, and now I had 2 of them at level 9.5, but I wouldn't hear, too many complaints if you swapped maybe BP in Scotland, or even put some of them kind of a little bit lower. So anyway, it is what it is. Scotland are going to be next. I'm looking forward to playing them because I love playing in Scotland. I think they're awesome. And what I have for you in my playthrough 5 are 3 options. As always, we come in here and we talk about an easy, a hard, and a wild card. So let's talk about what they're going to be. So easy, option 1 is going to be your easy option, and it's going to be Rising Heat of Stone and Sand and Devouring Teeth lurk underfoot. So this is your kind of damage team, and it's also your I've barely played them team. So I think Rising Heat is the only spirit in this game that I haven't yet played. So I haven't played them at all. You'd get to see them on camera for the first time. So it's Rising Heat, and then I think I played Devouring Teeth once. So they're the damage team. They do lots of damage. Devouring Teeth has like a damage amp and stuff like that. So if I go by Red's matchup axis, I think he has Rising Heat as like an S matchup, and then Devouring Teeth is like a B. But I think if you put them together, you probably end up with about an average of an A. So pretty good matchup. But if you want to see me flounder around a little bit with some damagey, easy to work spirits, that's your option there. I know I really sold it. I know you wanted to watch that now. So up next is our hard option, and this is going to be Ocean's Hungry Grasp in its base form and Bringer of Dreams and Nightmares. No, I lied. Oh God, I made a mess of it. It's Ocean's Hungry Grasp, Deeps, and it's Bringer Dreams and Nightmares in its base form. That's what we're doing. So I'm gonna offer up the Deeps Ocean's Hungry Grasp. So not my favourite. Don't really love the spirit all that much, and I wasn't totally in love with the Deeps aspect, but I put up a post, one of those how do you feel about posts a while back, actually ages ago, and I asked about the Deeps aspect, and people absolutely love it, and people were giving me a couple of tips around things I was doing wrong. So it's one I do need to get back to and give another fair chance. So maybe I do it on the channel. That's your coastal kind of your coastal dynamic there. So obviously Scotland on the coast, ocean on the coast, Bringer there to kind of combo and push things into the drink, but Ocean and Bringer both, at least according to Red's matchup and Axis, and I would say I probably agree with this, tough. We're talking about not great matchups there, so that's going to be hard work. Last option is our wild card matchup. This is going to be Wandering Voice gains Delirium and River Surges in Sunlight with the travel aspect. This is your Dahan matchup. This is the Dahan combo-y sort of Wandering Voice. You get your kind of defensive strife sort of stuff going on, but the special rule means you need to get the hell out of there if you want to get Dahan into the land. So you've got this kind of nice combo of Voice coming in and dropping strife and then getting out of dodge, and then River kind of running in with the travel aspect and kind of taxi River and beat kind of Dahan in and trying to get the defend going on. So I think that could be a really interesting kind of combo with them too. Does it work or not in the Scotland? Not 100% sure. I know they do a lot of damage on the coast and they've got lots of kind of build up of towns and cities, and you can't be too passive against them because they do have a loss condition. But anyway, that's it for today. That's your three options. If you're listening to this right now, the three options of them are going to drop, or they've already dropped. They're already over on the channel. I'll put the link below in the description, so when you finish this video, please do go and vote on which one of those you would like me to play as part of the next playthrough. But that's it. We're now over 2.5 hours. I have come to the end of the episode. If you stuck with me here, we're now 28 minutes past midnight on the 27th of February now. I'm into the following day. Really appreciate you being here. Honestly, if you've stuck here and you've listened to me talk about Brandenburg-Prussia and action economy for 2.5 hours, God bless you, because I don't know. I don't know anywhere else in any other community people will be putting up with me and listening to me talk all this kind of stuff. So it's been wonderful to have you here. Thank you again so much. Please do, get involved, as I say, get in the comments, drop down and let me know sort of, for Scotland now we're talking about. So BP's done. We're finished with them. Let me know about Scotland. Tell me your opinions, let me know. Do you like them? Do you not like them? Are they hard? Are they easy? All that kind of stuff I was asking about before, which spirits are good, which tactics are good, which strategies are good. All that kind of stuff will be really nice to hear from you. And then again, some nice stories. We heard a bit from Matt Cross before about his big wins that he was getting going along. So I really love all that kind of stuff and really do encourage you to get involved. But that's going to be it for me for now. And until next time, may your manifestations be always powerful and glorious. See you then.